Good evening. I'm going to call a meeting of the Concord Finance Committee to order, and please note that we are being recorded. And so let's just jump right in. We are a little late getting started this evening, but we now have a quorum, so we're happy for that. This evening we have one set of minutes from January 23rd. Do we have any comments on these minutes?
Yep, page 2, the second to the last paragraph. It talks about Article 8, and in that paragraph, a couple of references to Article 8, and actually, and that's exactly what he did say at the meeting. However, it's not Article 8, it's Article 9 in our warrant. So I don't know if we should have an asterisk there and, just a clarification at the end of the minutes.
Was the warrant finalized when we had that meeting?
No, it wasn't.
Yeah.
But he referenced it as Article 8, and it is Article 9.
Right.
So just, not to clarify, not to change it here, but at the end, to make it,
Yeah, somehow a footnote or something. When the warrant was finally published, this article became Article
Right.
9.
and then also on page 5, this is just a typo, not a typo, but a clarification. The second paragraph, last line, I believe the word should be needed, N-E-E-D-E-D.
Yep. Any other comments?
Yeah, I had one as well. On page 3, the last paragraph, where I was talking about some stuff, I also asked the question if fees were anticipated or have been assessed for being late on payments. And then I asked an action item to follow up and come back to the Finance Committee if they have been assessed. So that was one thing that Ms. LaFleur or Mr. Crane was going to come back with.
In that last paragraph, where did you?
Just sort of, it could be, I just wanted to include it, probably, maybe after the first sentence or the second sentence. Mr. Guariello asked if any fees are anticipated or have been assessed as a result of being late. If they are, can we have the number when it is
Available.
finalized or available? Yes, thank you. And that was an action item that we should put on our
Great.
bullets to follow up with.
Any further comments? Can I have a motion
So moved, as amended.
as amended? All in favor? Opposed? None? They're passed unanimously. Okay, so next item on our agenda, we have numerous warrant articles we're going through this evening. So the first article we're going to talk about is the Minuteman Regional. I'd like to step up and talk to us.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hi.
Thank you.
Could you introduce yourselves and,
Yeah, I'm Steve Ledoux, I'm the Concord rep to the Minuteman Tech. This is Bob Girardi, he's the finance director, and Michelle Shepard's our business manager. So we're here tonight to go over our budget. The Minuteman School Committee held a budget public hearing about 10 days ago now, a week ago Tuesday, and then voted a budget, which Bob will go through. It's been a very interesting year, new school, a lot of activity. We've had a record number of applicants this year for next year's freshman class. It looks like there won't be any out-of-district students in the freshman class. I think we've got close to 300 applicants, I think. So it's been a big year for us. So I'll turn it over to Bob now to make the presentation. And we're going old school with handouts tonight because Carrie kind of said nobody's going to be here to help you hook up your computer. So
we don't need this.
So some of the slides lose their luster when they're not up in shiny. The first slide, though, and I'll just go through each slide with you, if that's okay. The first slide is actually a beautiful view of the Lexington skyline, looking out of our front door. And the theme on the title page is managing our success, and I'm going to explain why as we move through this. And actually, Steve, you kind of touched on it. You know, our success is pretty amazing. It's an amazing story for this school. The second slide is actually looking in the other direction, looking at this inspirational school. And this building was built, it has untapped potential. It was built with program development in mind, automation engineering, including our already robust robotics and engineering programs, vet tech. There's a lot of programs that were in development when they designed this building. So the building is not only inspirational, but it has this untapped potential. And as Steve said, with the increase in applicants, now we have increased interest in all of our programs. The next slide actually shows some students who are working on a house, a Habitat for Humanity house. I believe that one's in Lexington, but we believe there may be one coming up in Concord very soon. So our students in our school go out to our communities and actually do good in our communities. The school-wide goals on the other side of that slide are the goals that dictate everything we do. They're pretty much the same goals that we've had for about 10 years because we've had constant leadership, consistent leadership, driving the school vision and mission. But they get tweaked every year, and so these are the goals that we make our budgetary decisions on. The next slide is when we start talking about managing success. So we've fulfilled a lot of expectations. There was a time when we had declining enrollment. Now we've boosted enrollment. In our first year in the building, we had the largest freshman class in over a decade. As Steve said, we have, for the next year, we have more applicants than we've ever had, and we have so many applicants from in-district communities that it's not likely that we'll have to have any out-of-district communities, which was a problem in the past for a lot of our communities. We also went through the process of getting a new regional agreement approved during this time period of getting ready to build a building. The building was built and we entered it a year ahead of time, on schedule and on budget. So those are all wonderful expectations that we've been able to fulfill. And also, because we moved into the building this September, this was the first year that we were allowed to bill the non-member communities a capital fee. And so that capital fee will be used to offset member districts' expenses on the debt. So that's a very positive thing. And those are all things that, you know, our communities asked us to do on behalf of our member communities.
Can I ask a question about that? So as your freshman class coming in has no non-member students, this benefit will ultimately tail out to zero.
I'm going to talk about our new norms.
Okay.
Yeah, you're a step ahead of me, but
Okay,
yes, that,
okay.
you know, you're already predicting some of the things that we're predicting.
So will enrollment and applications from Concord increase at the same?
They already have.
They already have.
We have 29 applicants right now for next year's freshman.
29, up
Yeah,
from,
you
up
have
from
25
25.
students.
25 now and 29 have applied?
You have 25 students now in Minuteman, and you already have 29 who have applied
For the freshman class.
for the freshman class.
Yeah.
For one
Yeah.
class.
And can I just ask one other thing with your building ahead of schedule and on budget? What is your construction cost inflation experience been like?
So I'm relatively new, so I'm not certain. I think we got in before the major inflationary concerns because we used an accelerated schedule, we were able to get it done under budget, which
I
is
see.
great.
Okay.
Yeah, but I do know that that's now changed because I've worked in other districts where we built when the economy was really poor and we were able to actually save a lot of money.
Right.
But right now,
I remember
construction
those.
costs are definitely going up,
Could you put a number on them, or is that not possible?
not off the top of my head.
Maybe we can come back to you on that one.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, just any questions that you have that I can't answer tonight, please
Thank
have
you.
Christine email them to me, because she and I like to email, and I love getting information out.
Already.
I think.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So now to Dean's question. The next slide talks about full enrollments here. What does that mean? Well, in the past, we had low member enrollment. Now we're predicting full member enrollment for a freshman class. Never happened before. In the past, we had full access to all programs. Now we're going to have waiting lists, definitely for out of district, but we may have waiting lists for member districts, and that we've never had. And that, you know, that's difficult for us to tell kids you can't get your first choice in a program. Now, fortunately, we do a great job with the freshmen, and they have options to learn about other programs, and so sometimes you know, maybe you're the carpenter's son, you think you want to go into carpentry, but then you go in and you try the different fields and you say, you know what, I like electrical. And then we do see that their first choice does change once they've experienced the school, but there will be possibly wait lists and some students not getting their first choice of their programs. That's our new norm.
So just one question along that line. When somebody's in a program, is it a 4-year program, or do you have the flexibility to change in your sophomore year and be able to graduate within the 4 years?
You do. So you really, it's, different programs have different requirements as far as the number of hours to get a certification. They can go through and not get a certification, but get a diploma. But usually, if they choose to change by their sophomore year, they still have enough time to get the hours they need to get that certificate. So we do see that, that does happen as well. And then sometimes some kids can shift into their first choice in their sophomore year, you know, maybe there's an opening in
Right.
that program. So that has happened in the past.
Okay, thank you.
You know, and then again, previously, 30 to 40% of our student body were non-members, and that was a concern for our members. Now we're looking at 0 non-members. And to Dean's point, we went through a lot of effort to get the approval to charge a non-member capital fee to help offset, but we're predicting within 3 to 4 years, that money will be going away, and the burden of paying for the building will be borne solely by our member districts. So, but that's, you know, it's, again, it's managing our success. You know, it is a positive story that your community will have more access to a greater building and greater programs.
So Bob or Steve, so one of the discussions that was going on at the school committee was around what to do if member towns can't get their students in, and how will decisions be made around who gets to go to Minuteman. Is there any further clarity on that?
Well, so, there's like, there is a formula that they use to determine how many slots each member community gets.
Guaranteed slot.
And there's 50% is guaranteed slots, the other 50% is based on your 4-year rolling average. So there is a formula that they use to guarantee a minimum number of slots, and then there's a formula to try and make it a little fair as well.
So, but it is possible now that member towns may not get students in.
Yeah.
So that's new.
Yeah,
That's
it is new.
Right?
I may need to take my glasses off for this next slide, the historical enrollment slide. Oh, there you go, full slide. So what we did here, though, was we color-coded this chart so that you could see in the yellow were our member districts in the past, when we had 16 member districts. You can see for 3 years, we have 10 member districts, and we projected it out one more year in blue, which is, you know, after, in the new fiscal year, we will have 9 member districts. Belmont will be leaving. And I'll explain how that affects you as well. That also affected this assessment. We also projected the number of students that might be enrolling from each district. So you can see in Concord, we projected the 29. That was actually, I think we actually had more than 29, because that was an 80% yield on the number of applications.
That's right. Yeah.
So we usually get about a 75 to 95% yield depending on the year. And so we went with an 80% yield on the number of applications and tried to project for people what the numbers would look like going forward. That's just a projection, and at some point I'd like to do a larger projection to try and help explain the long-term ramifications of debt, and over the next couple of years, how that's going to impact you. At some point, we'll work on that, but this was just kind of an initial enrollment projection, because we're talking about the increase in enrollment is one of the primary and major factors in the assessment. So that's what this slide talks about. And also the fact that we've lost member districts, so a greater amount is borne by the current member districts. A greater amount of the cost.
Is there a break point at which it's advantageous for a town to get out of the system?
So the town that just left, the school committee member is very articulate and really, he's a numbers guy, and he actually did a pro forma for them that showed that they were actually, at a certain point, they were actually going to pay more per student once their enrollment hit a certain level. And by the way, they had enough applications that would have hit it. So if we had room for all of their students, they would actually be paying more by leaving Minuteman. So.
Now, the way it is, they're not going to have
Now they're
anybody
not.
in the front.
Now they're not gonna have any
Yeah,
anyway.
Their students don't even have access.
Yeah.
And because they're not a member of another vocational, most of the regional vocational schools around here are all full. So now their students will have a lot less opportunity, and your students still have that opportunity.
Okay.
Next slide is a more simplistic chart, but it just shows you again that the dark blue bar is our member districts, and you can see how that's been raising over several years now. But as, you know, that's including those projected numbers. When I projected that out 2 or 3 more years, the yellow and the light blue bars were gone. There were no more withdrawing towns or no more member districts. But of course, the former member districts who have sophomores, juniors, and seniors, we would wait, you know, obviously, they're gonna graduate out over the course of the next 3 years. And then it'll be all member districts.
So just to return to Dee's question, a little bit more color on that, was it your sense that based on all the numbers that Belmont was sort of generating, that they were kind of just rolling the dice, that they would be able to send their kids there as out-of-district, you know, students, and now that's kind of shutting down? I mean,
Well,
you know, what was their?
I think that there was,
Logic.
I wasn't, again, I'm relatively new to the district. From what I've heard from the past was, there was a long period of declining enrollment at Minuteman. And their theory was that we're not gonna, you know, there'll always be room at the end.
Right, yeah.
And all of a sudden, there's no room at the end.
Right, yeah.
You know, literally in 1 year.
Right, and ironically, you know, Belmont led the charge for a design of a smaller school. Originally, the original design was
Right.
a bigger school.
It used to
It was
be
bigger.
800 to 900,
Right,
right?
yeah,
And
that's
you ended
right.
up with
Exactly.
600?
628.
It's very
So-
tight.
So they got what they pushed for, now there's no room for their kids.
And now they're not even in it, right?
You know, it's unfortunate for their kids, but,
Yeah.
you know, everybody sees things from a different vantage point.
Yep.
So it is what it is. The next slide's titled Challenges Now and Ahead. And, again, Dean, you kind of touched on that. With the withdrawal of towns from the district, it means higher costs for in-district towns to pay for the new building and the overall expenses. And it'll also mean reduced non-member tuitions, reduced non-member capital fees. So we're not going to have that to help offset our budget, and you'll see at some point in these slides how we do use that to help offset our budget every year. But you will have exclusive use of that building that other districts won't have. So those are the challenges of managing our success, is, you know, that we're going to have to make sure we do that fairly and equitably as possible. So, you know, now we get to some of the numbers, because of course, you deal with this all the time. Where's the increases coming from? When you have, by the way, this year's freshman class was the largest freshman class in over a decade. So we didn't expect to have that many applicants in our first year in the building. As a result, we need a lot more technology. The one-to-one initiative, we had to buy a lot more computers, you know, laptops for our kids. So we had to budget more for the upcoming year, because we know we're going to have an equally large class that we've never had in the past, you know, that kind of size. Our regular transportation is going up. In fact, we have an RFP, so that's a projection at this point, but, you know, expenses tend to go up. And also, I guess, with the new healthcare requirement for part-time employees, that's impacting a lot of the businesses that we do business with. Same thing with our security services, IFP, too.
Could I ask a question about, when you say you had like a large freshman class that was a little bit beyond expectations, is that gonna end up being a historically large freshman class because you have headroom, but as you go along, you'll start leveling that out, and so that will be a big bubble as it goes through, and then it'll pop out the other end, and then the other classes will be
I don't
evened
see
out.
it for a bubble, but what I do see is it jumped up, and now it's gonna level off around that level.
So future incoming classes will be able to be matriculated at the same population levels as the current one, is what I guess my question is.
Yes.
Or did you accept more because you have room sort of going out?
Yeah, we did, we always base our acceptance on the formula as far as the students, and, but we had more applicants than ever, and basically, the building was built for 628 students, and with the number of students we accepted, we were at 602 on October 1st. And even though the building is built technically for 628, We believe that if you now fill certain programs, you can probably get it up to 700. So that's why we can continue to have these classes about that size. So a couple of other big expenses, athletic services. We still don't have fields yet, and that's another year off. So a lot of that is field rental. Health insurance, as we all know, that's always a concern, and based on our health trust's experience, this was a number that they felt that I should be putting in there. So it's still a projection, but it is based from the health trust on our current experience with health.
So they're in a regional group.
Are they in the same group that Concord is?
I don't
Are you-
think
No,
so.
it's a joint, it's a trust with other vocational.
It's the Mass
Other
Bay Healthcare
vocational.
Trust, and it's
Okay.
5 different vocational schools that created this trust.
What's the rate of increase in that line?
8%,
8%.
yeah.
Yeah. So they were figuring between 7 or 8. We'll see where it comes in. And you know that, you see it in the town, right? Municipal. It's always one of the biggest budget busters. And of course, the debt service for the prior bonds, and this year we went out for our 3rd round of borrowing. And we only have one more round of borrowing when it's completed, once MSBA says it's a completed project. So we've got 3 rounds of borrowing, and we'll have one already behind us, which is a big impact on this current budget. And we have one more round of borrowing. This year's borrowing was 12 million, and I'm not certain, but I think the last one will be around 14 million. On to more budget drivers, and again, these are, health insurance. We also are negotiating our contracts. With the increased enrollment, we did have some increase in staffing. And then the transportation and the security services contract. I talked about the budget drivers with the technology and the athletics services.
Can you tell me, in your budget, what assumption you made around the salary, COLA, and lane increases? What percent?
Well, when you're negotiating, you really, we can't.
Can you tell us historically?
You know what, historically, their percent increase? Probably in the same.
2 to 3?
Yeah, historically, 2 to 3.
Thank you.
I mean, we're actively negotiating, or I'm on the negotiation subcommittee, and we've had a couple sessions with the union, another one after school vacation, so
But,
really
yeah.
talk about it.
Yeah, you can't presuppose
No, I
what it's
understand.
gonna
I
be.
understand.
And that's, that the salary increases are for all our unions, so, yeah.
Okay, thank
All
you.
right?
I don't know what the.
Invitation for bid as opposed to an
From
RFP,
the
which
stuff
is,
we were sent.
yeah.
Can you just talk about the head count for a minute, Bob? So head count growth, staffing totals?
I believe the net professional staffing was, I think maybe you saw in the larger PowerPoint
I
was,
did.
I think, 2.75.
Right. Net, right,
net,
yeah.
Because
So
we did increase teaching positions, but we also reduced some administrative
Right.
positions to try and offset that.
right. So the larger population is driving a little bit of staffing cost as well.
Yeah.
So the larger enrollment is costing them more on the teaching side.
Right.
Sped and regular teachers as well.
Right.
Remembering that 50% of the students here are sped, it's the highest sped population in the state is in this
In this school.
Really?
Yeah. So we do an amazing job with, with students who deserve a great education, so.
You do.
Yeah, thank you. So the budget history page, what this reflects, because actually, again, Christine, you're stealing my thunder.
Sorry. Sorry.
But what it reflects is when there was declining enrollment, you can see in red when we actually had lower operating budgets. But now that we're having increasing enrollment, we have had to keep up, and that's why our operating budget request this year is at 6.9%. We just wanted to show the trends, that we do follow the trends. But at one point, I believe, before I got there, they actually reduced about 19.5 staff members at one point. So, during the lean years, we reduced, but during the growth years, we have to add.
It would be instructive to have these percentage increases sitting next to, enrollment numbers or something, so that there could be at least some visual
Yeah.
Correlation.
Yeah.
correlation.
Side.
It's not gonna track, but it will be related.
Yeah.
Let's call it that.
Yep. Okay, the next slide is the revenue plan, and this really gives you a good summary of the increases overall for the district. So I talked about the The subtotal of the operating budget is actually 6.46% increase. Our initial estimates from the initial budgeting process was up at 9.58. We've worked hard to reduce costs to get it down to 6.46. The building debt was up at about 49% increase. We got it down to 47% increase. If you look under non-assessment revenues, one of the ways we did that was knowing that Belmont is leaving, they won't be paying an assessment, and I'm going to show you how that impacts you in another piece of paper that I passed out. But they will be paying tuition. So we increased the tuition. If you look at current year tuition line, traditionally every year we use about 400,000 of that to help offset the budget. This year, the FinCom recommended that we increase that to 600,000 so that we can use some more of the Belmont tuitions to try and soften that debt blow for you folks. So, so those are some of the ways we were able to bring down the overall assessment, which if you look at the very bottom line, the overall assessment is increasing by 9.34%.
And there's really, my observation anyway, not a lot of cushion in this, right? So you see they use 100% of E&D. Their OPEB is very underfunded. I think they're moving from maybe 50 to 55,000. 50 to 60.
Yeah.
So there aren't a lot of reserves in this budget that I can see.
Although FinCom's been very creative, and one of the things they recommended, if you'll notice, there's an ESCO lease, and I have some footnotes that I don't have on the slide, but the footnote is, when the ESCO lease was taken out, it was when there were 16 member towns. And so they're still being charged their portion of that debt, so that you're not being charged, it's being fairly distributed. That debt will be paid off within about 4 or 5 years. And so one of the things that FinCom recommended was, when you have retiring debt, then we could use that 500,000 or so to go towards OPEB and start being more aggressive with OPEB.
Right.
So that's the FinCom's plan to address our OPEB.
What was the ESCO lease for?
It was for heating and energy efficiency.
Equipment?
About 15 years ago, there was a heating, my understanding is there was a real heating problem with the boilers themselves, but then, back then, it was common to take an ESCO lease to also get the, the energy efficiency up as well.
Do you run classes year-round?
We do have summer programs. We also have night programs as well. So in the past, we had postgraduate programs.
Yeah.
But MSBA wouldn't pay for the additional space to have more postgraduates during the day. So last year or two, we've begun post-secondary programs. So we have a pretty robust evening program for adult ed, where we can
Okay.
charge tuition and bring in revenue for our revolving accounts.
Okay.
And we've doubled the number from the previous year to this year, we've already doubled the number of night continuing ed.
What about the summer sessions? Do you have summer school, or do you have, I'm looking at or thinking about having 4 different quarters.
Yeah, I don't believe, well, Michelle, you've been there longer. I
Yeah,
know we have
had
a summer school.
but it's last year around because of the move and stuff, we really couldn't do it.
Okay.
This next year, depending on what else is going on in the building, I think they are gearing towards doing the summer classes.
Okay. Do they
I know
also,
they do several camps too along the way, like in
Okay.
February, we do some, and we do some in April, the vacation weeks.
but if you had classes, do you also charge for the freight in
Yes.
terms of the building costs and things like
It
that?
goes into our
Is that-
revolving fund.
Yeah.
It goes into a revolving fund to help pay all of those continuing ed expenses.
The continuing ed, but also if they were a member school, the cost you pay for the building, is that included in the summer schedule or not?
Well, there's a rate that's figured with the supplies, the teachers, and an overhead factor as to the tuition that's charged for the classes.
Okay, so the
In the
overhead
past, we've had a
factor
group
does
that
have that,
It was more of a rental of the building, not
Okay.
really us
So it's
doing
not our
classes.
summer school program.
it's not
a
your
rental,
summer school program.
But then that brings in revenue for us.
Okay.
All right?
I have a question. I'm looking at our budget book, and it looks like our total cost coming in from you next year is forecasted to be about 904,000, and last year it was 768. So That's a,
That-
so I'm not sure we've got the same numbers, but forget that for a minute. It's going up, right? And
It
so
is.
I think it's going up by about 136,000 year
Very
over year?
close.
Okay, good.
You're again a step ahead of me. Everybody's a
Can you-
step ahead of me tonight.
Okay, all right. Where I'm going is, I'd really like to understand how much of that is because enrollment and how much of that is because of operating.
Okay.
That's
Next slide.
good.
So next slide actually does show Concord-specific increases.
Yep.
So you can see your enrollment, your state foundation enrollment only went up by 1. The October 1st census enrollment stayed flat. And because over the past 4 years you have had increases, it was like 17, 19, 20-something, up to 25.
Yeah.
Your 4-year rolling average has gone up, but only by 2.5. And so you're in a much better position, believe it or not, than some of our other member districts who had huge spikes this year
Okay.
in enrollment. And even with the 4-year rolling average, the spike in enrollment, because we're seeing this increase in enrollment, that affected them a little bit more dramatically in their overall assessment.
Okay.
We do have the 4-year rolling average to try and soften that blow for every district. But your numbers are all pretty good shape, but you'll see, even with your 4-year rolling and 4-year rolling average, the percent difference is about 13% in your enrollment. And so if you go down to the building and project debt, that's up 23% for Concord. But the total assessment is up 13.909%, which is consistent with that 4-year rolling average. That's the number one indicator. There are other
Percentage of
indicators.
enrollment
The
growth.
total at the bottom.
Yep.
You're
Yeah.
pretty much tracking.
Okay.
Pretty much tracks
Got
that
it.
4-year
Okay.
rolling average, which is the major indicator in the assessment.
Got it.
Good. And so I did hand out a supplement, which is going to answer your question. Because this is another, so I'm kind of calling it a year where we've had a triple whammy. We're managing our success, which is increasing enrollment, and increasing enrollment affects tuitions for our member districts, assessments. And you can see at the top, we talk about expectations fulfilled. We have a building where, we have advisory groups who tell us, for biotech, you have all this new equipment, we need more supplies now. The new equipment requires more supplies. So that's part of the budgeting process. It's part of managing our success. But the Belmont factor leaving, that's where gets to your question. So the first chart shows the revenue difference as a district as a whole, and how much it's gone up. The second chart shows the difference, and you were very close. Concord went up about 140,000.
Okay.
See that?
Yep.
But the difference between the assessment, what it would be with or without Belmont, you can see Concord's assessment is, without Belmont, is $1,213,000. With Belmont, it would have been $1,110,000. So basically, instead of going up 140,000, there's a $103,000 difference. Your assessment would have only gone up around 36,000. So you were very close on your numbers.
Okay.
But having Belmont leave, you can see they took $1,500,000 of assessments out of the pool
Right.
for all of our member districts.
But the spaces
Only
went somewhere
36
else,
for us.
right?
It was
What's
not-
that?
not a big deal.
Those spots went somewhere else,
Those
right?
spots went
That
somewhere else.
enrollment gets absorbed elsewhere, yeah? Some by us, some by others, yeah?
Acton.
So your numbers were very close, and it would have been a lot less if Belmont hadn't left. So that's the triple whammy. Belmont leaving was not helpful to our member districts this year. Now, this will be our new norm moving forward, and, hopefully, it'll stabilize over time.
I think that's what we're interested in a bit, is sort of, you don't have projections yet for, so if we saw 13% growth, which pretty
Yeah.
much tracked with our enrollment.
Yep.
But outside of that, so are we peaking on the debt this year, or is it gonna, or do we have more debt service to grow?
We have one more round of borrowing.
Right, but
So
we're gonna have more debt service than next year?
We'll have more debt service when that, and it depends on when MSBA finishes out the project. It could be a year, it could be a year and a half, we don't know. The other factors that we'll have to consider would be that we still have to build fields.
Right,
Now, we might save on all those athletic rentals, but then what is gonna be the operational cost of maintaining
Right.
you know, turf fields and those sort of
Right.
things, so.
And there was some thought, so you have the ability to do partnerships, and I know
Yes.
that the superintendent was pursuing some public-private partnerships. There was also potentially a deal with Lexington or Lincoln, which I think didn't end up
Right.
happening, so.
Won't be with Lincoln, that's for
well,
sure.
No,
okay.
it was Lexington.
Lexington, okay.
Yeah, and so the superintendent is actively pursuing the concept of creating a public-private partnership that could help offset any expenses with that,
Mm.
but it hasn't come together yet, so we can't predict it yet.
Right.
So we're hoping that that comes through. What's that?
The debt, the rate.
Yeah, and the interest rate, we were very fortunate that the interest rate, originally, when they had projected what the interest rates would be for borrowing, it was up around 3.8%. Knowing that the economy's been so good, we thought it was gonna come in this most recent round this year at about 3%. It came in at 2.5%.
So that's your 12 million?
Our 12 million came in
Okay.
at 2.5, 8833, something, yeah.
Oh, it was a good
You
And
know
you're
how-
looking at the 14 million in 1.5, possibly 2 years out, you
I would say
think?
1 to 1.5, but I
One-
can't guarantee that. I don't think the MSBA's schedule is their schedule.
So I have a question about that. I mean, the school is built, it's up and running. I assume that the contracts have been paid for. I mean, or is there some holdback?
Still got a lot of
that it-
punch lists.
Yes.
A lot of
there's-
punch lists still, and so
Yeah.
there's some holdback that this round of funding would then pay for. Is
Right.
that-
The other-
That money has not been expended, is what you're telling me, what I'm.
Correct.
So my thought was maybe there was a ban that was already issued that was just kind of like a short-term thing, waiting.
We did take out some bands to get us along the way, but they've been paid.
Okay.
And the other major piece that needs to be completed is there's still the old building. So we have
That needs
to
to be torn down.
demolish the old building
Right.
and then turn that into fields and do
Okay.
the field work and that sort of stuff. So those are the pieces that are still lie ahead for us.
And some of that is scheduled for the next round of borrowing.
Yeah.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
So I don't know if you have any other questions, but we've prepared as much data as we could for you tonight.
I got one question may or may not be able to answer. Historically going, I know Arlington's building a new high school.
Yeah.
And they have a significant number
Yep.
of the students there. Do you believe that would pull back your numbers from Arlington because of the school, or do you think it would stay consistent?
They seem to can't be consistent.
Yeah, I mean, they've been growing, their numbers have been growing in our school district for a long time, so.
And I know they're swelling too. so-
And they're a big city, so, yeah. It's hard to predict, but it doesn't seem like they're gonna be pulling back anytime soon.
Thank you.
Wasn't one of the rules that if you can get a program within your school, you can't then go to Minuteman, or something like that, or within your district? Something like that.
The law
How
that
does
they
that- how does that
changed,
roll?
yeah.
Well, the law they changed to try and encourage comprehensive high schools to have more programs.
Right.
But even if they have a program, if a student in a comprehensive high school says, I want equine studies, your district has to pay for them to go to Essex Aggie or any other, we don't have equine studies, so
Right.
they wouldn't come to us.
Right.
But they would go to some other vocational school. So if the student wants a vocational program, even if they offer some programs, the student does get to go to where they want to go.
I guess my point was, if a new building is being built in Arlington,
Yeah.
it's possible that it's got a more comprehensive offering when
Right.
it's finalized,
Yep.
so that some students might not
Yeah,
have
of
to
course.
come, and they would be required to stay in the regular school.
Absolutely, yes, that's a good point.
It's still a transition period for them
Right.
getting approval
Right,
for their
For their
programs.
programs.
Yes.
You know, build
Yeah.
it, they gotta get approval, and it takes several
Yep.
steps to get through, so
Yep.
that would still allow the student to still stay in the school until they were
Yep.
able to transfer over
Okay.
or back.
Thank you. Have any further questions? Anybody else got any further questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Steve, did you have any questions about the public hearing that we do in March? Do you want to talk about that at all with Dean?
I was just confused about.
The differences?
But I think I get it.
Okay.
We'll
'Cause-
have a similar PowerPoint.
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll do something similar with
Yeah,
them
the,
at the
the,
hearing.
the goal, more or less, of the hearing is to kind of like do a dry run of your town meeting presentation, more or less, and, you know, encourage a little more conversation than might occur at town meeting. That's really it. But I don't think you're gonna get much more time to do the presentation than you would get at town meting. So, which is pretty, it's like 5 minutes. You'll have to talk to the moderator, but it's like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So even less slides.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Long paths or less slides, one or the other. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, Concord Public Schools budget. Article 25.
Hi there. So we didn't want to do the whole presentation again.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. So we're really here to answer questions. I guess the obvious is that the CPS budget is the one place we haven't rectified yet our status with each other. So we're happy to talk on that as well. Nothing really has changed from where we sit. Budget stands as we built it. That's good news, actually, as a year moves forward, that what you build in October and November is still feeling really on track once you're into February. So we're glad about that. And we're really here to answer any other questions. Jared's provided you a lot of information over the last few days, so we're also happy to
That's a
talk on
lot of-
those pieces. Yeah.
Thanks, Jared.
Thank you for that. That was
No, seriously, thank you, Jared.
very helpful. I did a little looking at the final thing that you provided, which was the breakouts of the lanes and steps. And it seems like there might be a data error, but there might not be. CPS showed total FTEs through the 4 years, 1, 2, 3, 4, through the 5 years you provided us, of 252, 251, 248. So going right along, 274.
Yeah, so I probably
And
should
then
have
back
put,
down to 242,
Right.
which is way below all the other numbers, so.
so I probably should have left the FTEs out
Okay.
because they were straight from the system, and I meant to say that they're bodies, but they're what the system says. I don't have data
Okay.
really that I use from really FY 19 back when it comes to FTEs. So for the purpose of this one, don't look at the FTEs, look at the amount. I apologize.
The same weirdness sort of occurs in the CCRSD
Yeah.
series.
It's our system. We really don't I wouldn't say we don't recognize FTEs, but if somebody's split, the system sometimes recognize them as a 1.0, even though they're not. You have to manually manipulate it. So on this, we didn't, and I probably should have removed that column.
So you called bodies a 1.0 FTE, is that what you did?
Yes, yeah. I shouldn't have used the FTEs.
So, but you've started a new system as of this year, so we can track it
So,
more accurately going forward.
This budget book that we're putting out on March 5th or March 6th, one of the 2 days, is going to actually have FTEs. And now going forward for FY '22, '23, we're going to compare them to previous years. But for this year's budget, we're not comparing the FTEs to FY '20s, but next year we will compare FY '22s to FY '21.
Primarily, you'd be comparing apples and oranges, so it
Right.
wouldn't
Right.
Yep.
be helpful.
My other question on the data, which gets into the salary totals. What was the first year where you saw a budget impact of your early retirement offering? That, you know, people could take the early retirement?
Yeah, it was FY '19's budget.
So that was a real win. I mean, it shows up in these
Yeah.
numbers.
Yeah.
For the groups, I did these calculations from 216 to 17, CPS was up 5%. 17 to 18, it was up 6.8%, but then when that was in place, it was only up the total spend on salary was up 4.7. So that was a good reduction.
Especially at CPS.
That was CPS.
Yep.
Yeah, and then 2020, 5.3, we're sort of trending back up a little bit. And the same is true at CCRSD, 4.3, 6.3, and then down in 2019 when that offering was in place to 3.6, and then 3.8 last year. So I think that's been a real, it's had it, I think it's had it, the
Yep.
impact that you've
Great.
had
Glad you
hoped
can
for.
see it in
Yeah.
all these data
It's
points.
nice to, it's nice to see it show out in
Yeah,
the
it-
numbers, though. That's
Good for
great.
us to hear you
Yeah,
spot
well,
it.
Is that something that you find cyclical? Do you think like 10 years from now, you'd probably entertain?
I mean,
the
that's a
same?
good question. I've had short conversations with the chairs of the school committee to start to wonder. We don't have a set plan right now. It was put out as a one-time option, at least in the time frame it was offered, without a set time frame of when we might reconsider it. We are hearing that there's some interest among at least some of the union members to hear that it might come around again, but that wasn't the plan, was that it would be this ongoing planned cyclical piece. Knowing it was a win for us, and I think they felt that it was positive, it worth continued discussion, but that's where we've left it right now.
Okay.
Anybody else got?
I'd
Yeah,
like-
go ahead.
I'd like to talk about the gap that we still
Yeah.
have between.
That was good. We were, after everybody else said anything, that's where I was gonna come back.
Go
So
ahead.
thank you. No, that's okay.
You want me to
You're-
say something,
Go
or you
right
wanna say-
ahead. That was the point I was gonna land on once other things came out, but that's fine. We'll get to it.
Dean often reminds us that we're an appointed board, not an elected board, and I don't think that's because we can't get elected, but I think it's, I think it's because, although you don't know. I think it's because we deal with financial issues, and as an elected board, we could be subject to maybe undue influence by special interests. So we're an appointed board for a good reason, okay? And one of our main goals is one of our main responsibilities is to set the guideline. And you probably hear when we set the guideline, and you know that we look at things, we look at the economy, what's it's been doing, we look at where the market thinks the economy is going, we look at how's the town doing. We take all these things into consideration, we set a guideline. And we look at what's happening with the schools, we look at what's happening with the high school, and so we set a reasonable guideline, I think. And this year I thought it was very reasonable, considering we're eventually hoping to move down to a sustainable growth rate. We gave you a guideline, and you came back, and we relaxed our guideline, I think, by about $50,000 because of
We made a
We made a
recalculation.
mathematical error.
It was a recalculation, so it went down. So now we still have a $97,000 gap, right? And I'm actually perplexed by that, so I'll just be honest with you, right? For as long as I've been here, the town has always come in right on guideline. And the schools for a while, I think, didn't come in on guideline, and things were really sketchy, right? And now I'm worried that we're going back to that. And I have a hard time understanding $97,000 in a $40 million budget is a very, very, it's less, I think it's 0.25%, right? And I'm wondering, will the quality of education really suffer if your budget is reduced by $97,000? So I'm hoping, I'm hoping that we can come to some kind of an agreement, because I don't want to go into town meeting at odds. We will if we have to, if that's what we want, but we'd rather not, I think. So that's what I have to say about that.
You want me to go? I think we brought you a budget that was built from a zero-based process, so we know where every dollar's going, and we've got documentation and support to every single dollar, every FTE. We've continued to economize and reallocate and get creative in ways to accomplish those goals. So $100,000 does equate to something. It's going to be some support staff, it's going to be some supplies and materials, it's going to be contingency, which I don't think is in anyone's best interest. Any of those options leave us either modifying the programs we're providing or taking a greater risk. We're really feeling comfortable with the budget we brought. I've surveyed with my local area colleagues. We're all bringing budgets in between the high, around 3% up to 3.5, 3.6. Some of what you're seeing this year is the fact that we used circuit breaker funds to front-load these special education programs that we're building, which are reducing the tuitions. So those salaries getting incorporated in is partial of what you're seeing for the increase this year. That will level off a little bit differently going forward. And ultimately, you can see we're already gaining some of the fiscal solvency that comes with those programs, which you will also continue to gain going forward. If I were to find a recommendation to bring to the school committee, it would not be one I feel comfortable with, which is why I have not done so. I guess I would ask the same of you, wondering, with revenue numbers coming in stronger from the state and your free cash status, I guess I'd pose the same question to you folks to see if we could find a way to close it.
We had that conversation last week here at this committee, which is state Chapter 70 money is looking a little bit more robust. At least
Yeah.
the governor's budget has a more robust number than Carrie LaFleur had been budgeting for. And so we were sort of questioning, that shows up on the general fund budget, and you don't get any benefit from that, so it doesn't help you meet your expenses. We weren't really clear on that, because the whole purpose of Chapter 70 money is to support the foundation budget. So the fact that there's no actual alignment between that money coming in and your budget
Well,
is.
it's given to the municipalities
Yeah, I know.
to manage, so,
Yeah.
right.
It just,
Hence the conversation we're having.
yeah. It just is a little, it's kind of funky, that's all. We just find it to be a little bit of a challenge to see how one hand is helping the other. But that being said, your budget is built on what you expect to spend. And whether there's more money coming in or not coming in, this is the growth of your spending. And so we're at odds at the moment. We will have more conversations within the FinCom, and, we may reconvene the guidelines subcommittee if we feel it's appropriate, but we can just discuss it within the FinCom itself. But right now, I think we're just sort of agreeing to disagree.
I guess the other thing I'd just remind you of, hopefully the good faith you saw in a under guideline number on the high school is indicating to you that we're not asking for things we don't need. That would have been really easy to just keep asking to get to the number you offered us.
Right.
And we
Yeah,
did
we
not do
appreciate
that.
We appreciate
So I
that.
hope the trust is there that
Right.
what we're asking for really has legitimate
Right.
I will- places to go.
I will say that, it's an imprecise thing, but we sort of made a point of putting aside money for CCHS that was based on the fact that there was gonna be a difference going forward in population, and that's gonna play out in real dollars that Concord is gonna be assessed, for which we get almost zero value, because there's
Well-
so small differences in population that cause
Which is
big
playing out
swings.
that way. We
Yeah.
were able to
Yeah.
get operationally low enough that it offset some of that.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is, we put money into
Yeah.
what we were offering as a guideline for that, and that just sort of like,
Yep.
we're just doing our best there. So I don't know that there's that much more here. We're kind of just at a little bit of an impasse. I'm sure we'll have further conversations.
Okay.
It's a long time between now and town
Yes,
meeting.
there is.
But anybody else got anything else to say?
Well, so I may not be completely familiar with what a level service budget actually means and what the definition is, but that phrase had come up a lot, and yet when I go through it, I sort of... Cheers for that? I think not. And so when I go through it, I see a lot of what seems like increases. And my sense is that you have a tremendous amount of flexibility, both with your zero-based budgeting and the timing of your decisions and things that you want to do. And so that's why I, for one, feel as though probably you could have met the guideline, but circumstances led to you not doing so. And also, I think, we spent a lot of time trying to get the guideline and trying to get the sustained growth rate right. And so if we're going to do that, then shouldn't we stick to it? I mean, there's no fundamental long-term underlying change that would have changed any of those assumptions and estimates, I don't think. So if we agree to disagree, then I guess that's okay.
So I'm going to change gears for just 1 second and ask a question about the middle school process for the moment. Because we had a big conversation here. Peter Fischelis gave us an observer report last week, and one of the things that has become clear is that committee has now kind of focused in on a date that they want to have town meeting. And could you talk to us about how that dovetails with the MSBA process, which you're also applying for, and what the schedule for a final MSBA result would be? If we were to get money, when would the final result for an
Sure,
MSBA decision be available?
So we're in this conundrum because the MSBA submission deadline is April 10th. Certainly, we're not going to have any formalized securement of funding here for the project before then. So I brought that to the school committee to discuss. That wasn't a decision I was going to make by myself. So we discussed what those options looked like. And so the option to put in the statement of interest again, I'll remind you, it's the third time after being turned down twice, is really just a safety net to be sure the option stays open. If we don't do that, and for some reason, the way the fall plays out as we look at a town meeting and vote, then that would be off the table. I think we're all, certainly you're not surprised to have us say we're hopeful that a town meeting is successful and we don't need to wait for that outcome. I need to say very clearly, I have no reason to be any more hopeful that we're going to be accepted in than the last two times. There's no reason to expect that right now. We just didn't want to have worst case scenario play out and then realize we'd missed another opportunity, which would essentially, you miss that opportunity now, you find out in usually early December, and then you're out a whole nother year before you can even entertain the application back to MSBA.
So that's the question, so that I was trying to get to the nubs of. The decisions from the MSBA as to who's invited in and who is shed are finalized somewhere in December.
Yes.
What if we were to at least schedule the ballot vote after that comes in? I mean, you could have the town meeting whenever that you want.
Well, so we've looked a lot at potential construction schedules, and the longer you wait, the more things are going to cost. And it gets into operational challenges because the longer you wait, the longer you're going to keep two schools online, which also has significant operational costs to it. So the reason the committee has recommended to the select board, I'll remind you that is not the building committee or the school committee's decision. We are meeting with the select board on the 24th of February at 5:30 to have that discussion. The reason that we made those decisions is very much about economics. If you miss that September date and you can't get into the ground, which would be the hope that you can break ground before the winter time comes, and then certain things can keep happening over the winter, you probably aren't losing one-to-one time. You would essentially lose the whole winter and have to start in the spring. And that creates other issues later on down the road, as well as just taking longer to build. The fallout then, in terms of operational costs, the goal really is to have something in line for the fall of 2023. If we miss that, and we're in flux, where we're opening mid-year, then we're not only having to keep the current schools online, but we're going to be creating operational costs for a new school. So you'd be paying 3 sets of operational costs for at least a portion of the overlap. And I have had a little moment of not having any way to know how to build you a budget the November before if all those variables are in play. So those are just some of the highlights of what the committee's been processing and reviewing, which is why they're putting forward a recommendation to the select board for a September special town meeting and ballot vote.
So let me ask that, let me just ask a follow-up on that. You said if we have this September vote, then we can, quote, get in the ground and get going.
Yep.
By the time we get to September, we're going to have biddable documents by the time we take that vote that can be bid, and then construction can start by the fall?
It's all part of the process we're going to be working on now, that everything's ready to go out pending funding. Yep.
Okay, so I thought we funded a feasibility study and something.
Schematic design.
Schematic design.
Yep.
So our schematic design generates biddable documents.
So let me clarify, because the getting in the ground is the year after. You're
Oh,
gonna go
okay,
into
all right, so that's where I'm like, this is
design.
impossible, we're not gonna have a
Yeah, no, it's
plan.
But it's
Okay.
really a 12-month period, so you'll be losing time in the
At
21
We're
timeframe.
gonna be losing
Now I
time 12
realize
months
why
out,
we
and
need to
that
clarify.
can't be compressed
Yeah.
if you waited 2 months or 3 months.
Correct. So time we lose on this end
It
accumulates.
just pushes the, okay, now I'm clear. 'cause
However,
I'm
we
like,
will have documents sound enough to get a solid number to bring to town meeting, so that it's on track with what
That's
we
what-
need.
I have an odd question that's not related. Are the elementary schools, all of the elementary schools filled to capacity?
Sure. So right now, we've been watching those enrollments because Willard is at about I'm gonna ballpark this, 420. Alcott is the largest right now at about 480. And Thoreau is sitting at about 450. So given those trends, we've decided that the apartment complex, the Muse complex, we're gonna start to redistrict as kids enter, not moving kids who've already started. They're all going to Alcott right now. So we're gonna just begin to start enrolling them at Willard and make some progress towards balancing that out.
What's happening at Ripley
What's happening at Ripley?
besides voting, and I know that
Yep, so for a wide range of things, at Ripley, the preschool program is there, 4 classrooms of our integrated preschool program that we must run by law, as well as Concord Children's Center rents space from the town for a couple of classrooms. And we have just put in an 18 to 22-year-old special education program that's housed on the other side of the space that we use, plus all the central office and office spaces.
would it ever be possible to entertain taking the 6th graders that are all now in Peabody and moving, when I went to school, elementary school went up to 6th grade.
Oh,
That's what I'm getting at.
oh, yeah, no, the elementaries aren't large enough to bring the 6th grade back to that.
Because
space.
then you would only have one building, not 2 that you were for the middle school. Same.
Right, I guess my answer's in 2 parts. One is there isn't space at the elementary schools, but the second part is our vision of a middle school is a 6 through 8 building. And we believe strongly that's the model we'd like to be looking at. Creating a 7-8 building would be much more of a junior high approach. And I can give you a whole night's presentation on the differences between those 2 things, but we are committed to a middle school model, which is 6 through 8.
That would be, I mean, now. I mean, before
Oh,
the new middle school.
no, there's no room at the elementary schools for the 6th grade to go back. No,
I have one
nor would it
question.
be the same model we're using.
I just have one question. When you were talking about, you were going to have town meeting in September, and...
Special town meeting.
Special town meeting, sorry. Special town meeting in September, and then December is when MSBA comes out with its information. Do you know of any schools who have applied for MSBA funding who have already taken a vote so that, I mean, when we vote in September, that's to pay for the school.
Right.
So do you know of any other school that has ever applied for MSBA funding that got it
I don't,
after the fact?
but that's because communities able to consider doing it without MSBA funding are so rare, that set of circumstances, I don't know if has played out before. So there's a handful that have gone on to do their own. I don't even know if they've put the SOI back in again. We could find out. It's just a couple of places that have been able to pursue it
The
without.
SOI?
Statement of interest.
Okay.
That's the document we submit, so.
Okay. So by submitting it, though, we lower our chances automatically,
Well, if
do
we-
you think, or?
But perhaps, certainly they're going to know what's going on here. They already do. Again, we haven't had good chances to start with.
Right.
So it's not feeling like a great loss to me that we've lowered our chances. I think we haven't been in the running so far for a number of different reasons, so.
Okay.
I think our action at town meeting last year showed strong interest by the town in pursuing the project. So we sent a strong signal to the MSBA, and they still turned us down.
And some of that's just data. There's a lot of districts putting in every year up to 70 to 80, and they're funding 12 to 15 projects. I mean, you're just the odds aren't good to start with, and the way they vet the project is based on building and need and things like that, so,
Did I understand you to say that this would be the last time you're applying for MSBA funding?
well, if we are funded at town meeting, it will certainly be the last time.
Because I just, I ran my own sort of superficial and probably incorrect, sort of break-even analysis on what the incremental cost would be annually, and with many assumptions, including the assumption of the school and the assumption of the reimbursement. And, so if a school of $85 million compounded at 8%, it would be 6 and 7% a year. It sort of gives you 4 more years to see whether it might not be a net positive to the town to wait for a $30 million reimbursement as opposed to going forward ahead. Now, I know there's some problems. You mentioned one, like cost of operating 2 schools would be
Certainly.
another offset. But it just seems like the break-even analysis that I'm sure someone else will do at town meeting would suggest that you could wait.
So we've done that data. We presented it at town meeting last year. We're happy to bring those slides back to you because of the percentage increases that are occurring in the construction industry right now. The cost annually is, what number were we looking at? 7% higher per year? 5 to 7% higher per year. You add on to that the fact that we've got additional operating costs that we've already named publicly, $500,000. We think we can lower that by annually. And then I'm just going to remind you the educational piece of what happens while we wait is significant.
The other thing you need to be careful of is the reimbursement rate. I think our reimbursement rate would be in the teens.
Oh, really?
15 to 18.
That would change the analysis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is reimbursed?
And then there's that category of reimbursable that is a very
Right.
MSBA-based threshold. And you've already lived this in the other schools. And even as we start to talk with the designers right now, it's very restrictive. And so is what Concord wants in a middle school going to fit exactly that formula of MSBA? I can assuredly say no. And then they don't reimburse whatever you want to do beyond their formulas. So it's not dollar for dollar either, that everything that we would be building would be at that percentage. So,
Thanks for answering the questions.
you're welcome.
Anybody got any further questions for the superintendent on this budget? Because there's another budget, and we're moving.
Couple other
We have a
articles,
large,
right.
we have capital, we have a large
have a
agenda
lot.
tonight, so we need to keep moving along.
Capital's not much to say.
There's not
there.
much to say here.
It's 900,000, right?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. And you're replacing some energy
we
recovery
can remind you what
units,
we're doing.
and, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Fun stuff.
Yeah,
Save us money, though.
good, good. Is that
All
in your
right,
budget?
so which article did you want to talk on
So
next?
just to be a little more crisp about that, we got an email to the committee from a citizen who is also a select board member, but just writing to us as a citizen. And she is concerned about decisions that we make that cost us in capital and save us in an operating mode, and how we kind of account for that going forward. Now, there's much bigger fish to fry when you're building a brand-new building and you want to build it with sustainable features that might be costly, and then how do you lay that off against the benefit of maybe operating cost benefits? But as something as simple as a new ERU, do you have some way to account for the benefit the economic benefit that it might give you?
Sure. So we're thinking right now about a 20 to 25% savings
In
in
electricity or?
energy. Yep.
In
Heating.
energy.
Yep, heating.
Yeah.
Yep.
In
Yeah,
heating?
and that
So
was
that was
in
a
your
rough
budget?
estimate that we got.
And that was in your budget?
Not for 21, but
Got
it would be going forward. We haven't seen the actual yet, so we don't know what that would be.
Yep.
But going forward, we had somebody come out and give us sort of a report with our facilities manager, and 25% was a good number we were gonna use.
It also depends how many we can actually replace, so we need to go out to bid and see what the actual costs are gonna be and see how many of them we can do. The more we do, the more we'll save. We have to see how far the money will go.
So,
I think it's good
Yeah.
that we remember, though, going forward, that we've got some cost-saving investments we're making. These RDUs is one. The middle schools, apparently, I'm hearing $500,000
That's
in
the number we've
operational
been
savings
using publicly,
that we
yes.
should be seeing reflected in your budgets, right? So,
The middle school we can't do till we have a new school.
we have a new
But-
building.
Yes, Mary, yes, at that point, absolutely,
still going to be here.
yes.
So sometime when we put the guideline letter together, somehow we've got to bake that into the process where
Sure.
we look for specific cost savings. Because right now, I don't think we do.
Sure,
okay,
makes sense.
all right. So I don't know that we have any further questions on the capital number, other than just this.
I mean, right there,
these
there's
off-
another
these
reminder,
offset
there's,
sorts of
there's a
things.
sitting 100,000 there every single year to do the surprises at Sanborn and Peabody, and that you'll be able to
Right.
use elsewhere too,
Right,
so.
good.
So that is kind of a contingency number, like you don't have anything planned. that
No,
you're-
that's what we use when things we don't expect happen, and we hope it's enough, yes.
So there's 90. It's in a different bucket. All right,
Okay.
all right.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
On Tuesday night, I was at a meeting, it was the Thoreau District redevelopment. There was a man that was talking about, and there's a good chance he's going to be standing at town meeting, questioning the electric buses, given the fact that the diesel buses, many of them are very empty. And he has a history with the buses, so he's somewhat informed. And he came up with some numbers that if you filled the bus, the cost of running the bus per student was not very much. But with a minimal number of students on the buses, it's expensive to run those buses. It's very expensive to buy 2 more buses, 2 electric buses. Yes, they're cost efficient, they're green and everything else, but the actual cost is an outlay of quite a bit of money, and who's to say there's going to be many students on those buses?
Andrea, I think if you hold your questions for Article 30, they might be more appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
To where?
We're going to be,
we're gonna get
Get
to
to
that.
that one.
We're
We're
gonna
gonna
get to it. So,
good thought,
you
hold it.
know,
Oh, okay.
you're.
I'm
you're-
ready when we get
Yeah,
there.
yeah, exactly. I'm just saying that's a petitioner, and he'll be happy to speak to that. Okay? All right.
Here we are.
Yep, so, no, you, don't worry,
We're
we'll
talking
get to
about
you, yeah. So, next we're on the regional district budget. And this is that guideline. We just put our guideline down, I don't know how much more we have to say here.
We don't have-
I don't think we have anything more to ask you about on that.
What I
I think we're good.
expected.
Yeah, exactly. Anybody else? Anybody got any questions about the
Not
district
on that budget.
No? Okay, well, thank you for that. Okay, now let's dive in to Article 28. We'll just call it the parking lot and see how that goes.
May I, we haven't really spoken to you on this one very much, so this
No.
one I might actually preamble. So we're picking up from last year's article that had the roadway and the parking lot combined. The article last year was a $2 million article to be split between Concord and Carlisle. That obviously didn't move forward, so the committee revisited the option sets going into this year's town meetings. We had a lot of discussion, multiple meetings on what those options were and what the priorities were and why certain things might be the recommendation and why they might not. The decision was made to move just the parking lot forward and not the roadway in an effort to not have such a big ask for both communities. The prioritization of the parking lot was really about the wellness of the kids and the stress that we have on them and the way it plays out when they're not able to park on campus, and just the ongoing day-to-day issues it creates because we're restricted. And we've got the whole presentation we can bring back to you before town meeting, which reminds you we lost parking in when the new building happened, and it's been a struggle ever since, despite attempts and tries. A lot of that discussion and hesitation still is not just around cost, but also around sustainability. I've been working very actively with a number of groups in town, activating with the kids. We're trying a lot of different things. Mothers Out Front is part of that discussion right now. We will have a whole set of plans and options that we're going to be moving forward with in time for town meeting to show that hopefully there's some belief that those don't have to be mutually exclusive, that just because we are hoping for more parking doesn't mean we're not committed to sustainability. And frankly, it's not going to fix everything because we're capped at what we could even build given permitting that has yet to happen, which would be about impervious surface in the watershed and drainage needs. So the goal here, I think, is to put it out another time and see. It was a 12-vote differential, which is close enough for, I think, some of us to feel like it should at least be brought back for the community to consider. Carlisle will have to do the same, and in a new and unusual way of doing things. We expect the meetings are happening simultaneously this year.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So I expect through the moderators, there's so far been a discussion of having the schools in the regional schools on in Carlisle on Monday night and in Concord on Tuesday night, which would have them go first, which I don't think has happened before. So that's where we're at. It really is about student need and this ongoing chronic issue that just continues to plague us and build resentment and frustration. And we just feel really strongly we need to try again to address it. I've been very clear as we've shared out that it's moved forward, that this has got to be something the community wants and comes out for. But we are moving it forward. The school committee, it was a 4-3 vote, just so we're completely saying how we got to it. A lot of that was around sustainability concerns and the commitment to ensuring that those options were moving forward as well. So I feel really strongly. I've spent a lot of time with kids in the last 2 weeks for lots of reasons that we don't need to talk about tonight. But it's important that we continue to address their mental health and their wellness. And when I met with some of the strongest activist students on sustainability and we talk about parking, they want to be sure we separate those two because the kids are driving anyway, they're parking in other places, and the need to try to get the edge off of this topic once and for all is really predominant and important to them and therefore to us. So.
When you say separate the two, sustainability and parking, what do you mean by that?
Well, there's been some messaging back. I think, at least my perception of the messaging back is we are not believing in sustainability and promoting sustainability because we're going to make it easy to keep driving. And that's not in line with the goals of the community.
Right.
I don't think we see it quite that way. I think we see a need that needs to be fixed immediately while we all work on changing our behaviors and doing other things. And as a result, we're simultaneously trying to look at the way kids and, frankly, the adults are part of this discussion too, because we have just as long or longer of a drop-off line every morning at all the schools because parents are driving instead of using the bus, and try to look at that culture piece, which is a long-term discussion. That's not an immediate. The intent when the parking didn't happen at the new project, when the high school opened, was if we don't build it, then it'll just go away and people will do other things. That is not what's happened. People are still frustrated and trying to still get to school with their vehicles and getting bogged down in what the options are for parking, kids primarily.
So are you saying that the fact that we lost parking spaces that weren't replaced was intentional when they built the high school?
Mm-hmm.
That was intentional?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not sure about that, but it's a.
It was a known discussion from at least a number of the folks I've spoken to. It was a known discussion. So I don't want to debate all that without all the other people. I wasn't here, so.
I think the chair would like to.
Sure, Wally, go ahead.
Address us. Why don't you step up to a microphone, Wally?
What?
No, it's fine.
And introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, who?
I'm Wally Johnston, Chair of the regional school committee. Not to contradict the superintendent, but I think the difference, as I understand it, we had the landfill, and we parked a lot of cars in there.
Yep.
And those were factored into that 500 and change number.
Okay.
We were also parking cars on almost every piece of grass around the front of the building. So if I remember correctly, the number was 527 or something like that. And we, in the process of understanding that we were going to do something about the landfill, you could only create in the remaining space a number of spots that we have. And then we added up by the fields in back of the building, or front of the building, on the other side from where you come in. And then, because we are now talking about this lot in space, having done a study and design of what we might use that big piece of land, that's the only piece left on the campus, there is space in there to build this lot and to add these additional spaces that we lost in the process. I can't speak to whether or not there was a deliberate decision to decrease the number of
I know I've heard
spaces.
that, whether that's true or not, I wouldn't validate or
Because
deny.
that would go way back to the building committee from the high school, which now nobody on the committee was involved in that, including myself. The building was already designed when I came on. I think it's a complex equation because of the landfill, which we were parking on when we first moved into the building, but then shortly thereafter closed that off to begin the process of all the work we did there to test. But I'll draw your attention back to the work that's been done there, the designs that have been done there to utilize that space in a way that enhances the campus.
So I think one thing that might be helpful, if we're going to have a robust we're going to have a robust conversation at town meeting, it's just going to happen, it's clear, is if between the time that it was brought last year and failed, and we bring it again, you could say something about efforts that are underway, things that the school is doing to make this climate crisis that we are all facing really something that is, starting to change behaviors. And anything you can say that will help us understand how the school's engaging with the problem. Because what it feels like to me is, as long as I can still drive my car, I'll get an electric one and I'll do this, but I want what I want. And I'm not gonna change so much, but we're facing a situation where all of us are going to have to make fundamental types of changes, not just, I'll buy a Tesla, but fundamental types of changes in our behaviors, or the climate crisis will continue. So anything you can say that is engaging with students, or they're engaging with this problem, that is showing behavioral change, because this is a behavioral problem. And,
We're going to show the efforts we're making.
Okay.
The outcomes are a different thing, and I wish Kate Hanley was sitting next to me, because she would give you the whole spiel of how changing some of those choices we make is a long-term cultural process.
Yeah.
We are absolutely going to be putting options in front of kids. We've had the bike club over meeting with us to talk about running a cyclothon this spring. We've talked about the limitations of why kids don't ride their bikes, which is a whole nother meeting probably. We're surveying kids, juniors and seniors, as to why they make the choices they do, because I came to the conclusion to try to offer them reasons to change when we aren't totally aware of the decision-making process makes no sense. Mothers Out Front is creating a parent survey that's going to go out to all of K-12 in March when we get back, because this is a very much an adult conversation too, not just about kids. The kids are doing whatever's going on around them. They're part of whatever choices the adults with them are making. So we're going to be dissecting all of that. We want to better understand how the buses could be utilized so that we're offering options that are more appealing and more attractive and increase ridership, which frankly is really just a high school discussion. And we can talk about why other buses might look less. It's also about service and how long we're gonna ride a kid on a bus. But at the high school, it's different. We have to provide them all seats, and when we get to that, we can talk on that.
There's plenty of dropping off going at the
There's
K
plenty of-
through
there's-
8 level
oh,
as well.
Oh, of course, of course. We are gonna try to help people give and think optionally about that, but to actually mandate something is not an option. So we will get that all packaged for everyone, so everyone can hear what we've been working on and how and why, and I'm asking that the sustainable groups in town that I meet with regularly and are all at the table with us, maybe choose to be part of that conversation, as well as the kids and parents who choose to participate. Because I think if there's one thing I'm sure of, that this voice is not enough to make this feel like it's a well-informed discussion of all the different things that come into the topic.
Brian, you had a question?
Thanks for the overview, I appreciate that. So we have, how many slots do we currently have?
It's about 400, 230, these are rough numbers because I don't have them in front of me, 230 or so are for the kids, the rest are for staff.
Okay, so 200.
And about 10 visitor, maybe, 10 visitor slots, which is woefully inadequate.
Yeah.
And then how many seniors do we have at the school?
So we're at about 300. Every senior, for lack of another way to figure it out that felt like it was gonna be fair, every senior, we have those slots, the seniors get first preference for the slots we have for kids. We've been able to provide all the seniors who want to drive, which is about 230 of those 300, a slot, and then the juniors don't have any options at all. So if they age into a license, they were driving and parking somewhere else.
So what struck me most about what you were talking about was you kept saying wellness, which is about health. You're talking about mental health. Can you help me understand
Sure.
what is mentally destabilizing about this situation?
Yeah, so, and I have to kind of back up so you have the whole big picture. Our numbers of anxiety disorders and depression and some other extreme and acute mental health issues is at all-time highs. Our data is even higher than those of our like communities in the national data, which is already incredibly concerning. So we have large groups of aggregate kids who are presenting in data that shows that on a regular daily basis, they're really struggling to get through the day without some pretty significant level of either depression or anxiety. And that plays out in a whole lot of different ways that would take a while to talk all the way through. And then we have a smaller percentage, but far more concerning group of acutely challenged kids. We had a suicide 2 weeks ago that I don't want to talk much about tonight. I have 3 other kids today that have gone off in ambulances, and it's becoming a crisis. So our goal has been to find a way to address anything and everything we have control over. Parking is actually not one of them, because we can't control how they get to school. Controlling options, so to make it easier to get there, because what the kids will describe to me, if they've got after-school sports that don't allow them to take the late bus or the regular bus, or they've got a job that they've got to get to, or they've got an early morning hockey practice, they're coming from all these different directions, and they're going to all these different places. And so once they're able to drive, never mind the family dynamic of whatever other activities the family may be managing, it makes it a more timely, more efficient, effective way to get to and from places. What's happening with the parking situation, if they age in and they have an option to drive and they're parking down Laurel Street's a hot spot, so I'll use it for example, they've got to get there first come, first serve, which means they get there, okay, we built a late start time of 8 o'clock, they're getting down there 6:30-ish, so they have a spot, and then they're hiking up the hill to get up to the top, and it's negating the late start time, it's the stress of, am I gonna get a spot or not gonna get a spot, on and on, it just accumulates, and is adding on to this already aggregate problem. I could do a whole nother night on all the other things we're doing, but I won't because we're doing parking, but we're looking at curriculum and service delivery within the schools and how we manage transitions and how we're messaging things, and that is a whole lot of other discussion. But our level of concern is extraordinarily high.
You mentioned the surveys there, a couple quick questions.
Yeah.
One, if you were to have just a parking lot that would fulfill every student that requests for it? What would the size, do you know what the size would be?
It would be bigger than that. I mean, we've never really asked, we're afraid to ask the juniors because we can't execute on it. So the junior class ages in to the age when they would be eligible to park. The 100 would be a decent portion of that. We'd also have to do some rearranging, so some visitor spots expand, because that's the other really pressing point of not having enough spots when people come to visit the schools. For example, college recruiters and that list of important people that you'd want to have. So there would I don't know if I want to make a guess, but over I think it's probably about 150 juniors would probably be really looking for spots by the time they get to the late part of the spring, maybe up towards 200. We're not going to meet that. We know we're not going to meet that. We're good with that.
Just curious, just a ballpark of what
Yeah,
we'll do it.
yeah.
And in the survey, did it mention how many students do park on Laurel, like into like all
So
Starbucks? I'll just say that whole like, you know.
The seniors
range.
went first. Now, they're the easy ones, right? Because we know what they're doing. The juniors just did it this week, so I haven't seen the outcomes
haven't
yet.
seen
So I'm
those.
really intrigued to see what the junior class says about the choices they're making on getting to school,
Yeah,
because
'cause
that's going to reveal some of
I have
that.
heard, to mental health, I have heard that kids get down to Laurel and they're sleeping in their
They do.
cars just to get a spot so that they
Yeah.
don't have to walk.
You should ask the seniors what they did as juniors, because right now, not that many juniors have their license yet, you know.
They're starting to age in. Yeah, so we'll see what the data shows, but you're right, we could backtrack too.
I do have a question, going back to the very beginning of what we were talking about, where you were saying you separated out the driveway and the parking lot. And
in
you're
the
only
article.
focusing, yeah. And last year, the article had both. And if I recall correctly from last year, I believe that you had responded to a question on that by saying that if you do the parking lot and you do the driveway separately, then the next time you get to do the driveway, you have to tear up some of the work that had already been done. So I think you'd probably get, if I'm remembering it, you'll probably be getting a similar question. Why did you decide to
Order
separate?
matters, so you would absolutely be jeopardizing the work on the roadway if you then went back to build the parking lot, because drainage and all of that is gonna make you chop that roadway up. Doing it in this order, you put the parking lot into an already chopped up road, you're gonna just patch it back up again. And it will have some cost to it in terms of repairing the roadway that you've had to,
Right.
but not in terms of undoing a brand-new roadway that you've just built.
Okay, so that is your argument
That-
for that.
it is
And how are you gonna get around the impervious nature of the parking lot?
Right, so the design work we had done through Gale Associates that did the engineering feasibility study, it's not the full design of the parking lot, it's the feasibility part of it. They used the old percentage that we had with the old high school, which we're under that percentage right now, as the goal. Now, we need to go get permitting for that, we completely know that. So what the parking lot we're proposing would do is bring us back to the impervious percentage that we had with the old building.
With the old building, okay. That doesn't help your numbers in terms of visitor parking or anything like that, does it?
So we'd have to, what we would do is take some of the space up at the
At
top
the
of the
top?
hill, that right now, some of that's going to some kids, shift those down, actually, that's going to staff, shift the staff down to the big lot, shift the kids down to the lower lot, and use some more of those spaces for visitor parking.
The ones that are up,
Yeah, the one up top there by the
yeah.
main
by the
door.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
the back, but the front. yeah.
Near the playing field.
Yeah,
You gotta make taking the bus cool is what you've gotta do.
you're right, John, we're gonna figure that out, yeah.
So going back to Dean's idea about discussing the other things that you've been doing as potential offsets, I think that's a great idea. We had asked last year for some kind of analysis of the bus system and, you know, if it could be done efficiently, and if you could say we can
Yep.
take X buses off the road because
Yep.
we've done a capacity utilization and restructured the
So we've
routes and
done
things.
quite a bit of that
That
work.
would be, if you
Yeah.
could take some buses out, that would at least counter part of the,
Right, so the way buses work, and we did work with a consultant to review this a year ago, the way buses work, it's a factor of time, distance, and ridership. And those are the three variables. So while you might see, so I'm gonna answer your question now. While you might see that the bus is under-enrolled, essentially, that may be because it's going so far that if you pack kids on there, you're gonna have a bus ride of an hour and a half. So all those variables play in. I think the other piece in this community, which is true in many communities, is the level of service expectation. Sure, you can save buses and time. if you're gonna start consolidating stops and things like that, and really forcing the service level to change. Right now, we're pretty accommodating in terms of how we pick kids up. They don't all have individual stops, but convenient for sure. You start moving that around, you could start to save some money. I do not in any way think this community would find that satisfactory, but you could. So those are all the moving variables. When we worked with the consultant, he was quite validating. One, that owning our own buses is a more cost-effective way than outsourcing. And two, that for the level of service expectation here, we were running a pretty efficient service and operation.
What is the expectation?
So we aim for 30 to 45 minutes, 45 being the outside.
Okay.
In other communities, my first district that I was at for a long time, we couldn't get to that because we couldn't afford the buses to do it, and we would aim for more, closer to 45, no more than an hour. That's a big difference in the life of a young child on the bus. So I'm grateful we're able to do what we do here. I think it's better for kids.
You reduce that if people were asked to walk, say, a quarter of a mile to a collection
You
point?
could, sure. Can I tell them it was your idea when they
Sure.
complain?
I walk
You
both
could,
ways
of
to
course you
school,
could.
uphill, both ways.
Of course you could. Of course you could, Dean.
Hey, one other question, going back to the parking lot. What would be, apologize if I missed it too, the operating expense going forward, plowing, all of that type
Oh,
of
sure.
stuff? Like, if it does pass, how much would that add to the budget?
Yeah, minimal, I think.
Yeah, minimal.
Minimal?
Yeah. Good question, though.
Would it be paid for by parking fees fundamentally?
It could be, sure. I mean, in terms of where the fees right now go to some staff that we have that do security and monitoring of the space and the facilities. I think it would be minimal because it would just be additional to what they're already doing for another lot. And since we do all our own lots extensively, it would be just one more for them to do.
Do you know the one for the current lot? Like, just a ballpark? I don't even know what
How much it costs?
Yeah, just for like just for the,
See, the way that we kind of break it up is we have, sort of the overtime, and then we have, we work with a vendor that has a loader, Fenton. I don't want to give you a wrong number, so I can get a number for you by tomorrow.
and it's essentially just plowing and cleaning?
Correct, yeah.
Just that type of?
And the other variable is the type of storm it is and how much snow it is and how many
Yeah,
passes they
yeah,
have to
yes,
have.
yeah,
and-
But those are the two big factors in
Yeah.
in operating a parking lot.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm hoping that in FY '25, we're not sitting here wondering all the problems that we forgot to think about when we built the middle school.
Oh, there'll be a lot.
So,
I'm hoping parking isn't one of them there, yeah.
but I do know that you said last week at the League of Women Voters, First Friday, that you learned a lot from the high school.
Yeah.
So let's, things like the parking, the bus depot, about parking, things like that, so.
And I've learned it
I know-
third hand, right, because I wasn't here.
I
I've just
understand,
heard
I
all the
understand, but
versions of
so,
the stories.
I guess I'm just hoping
Yeah.
that when you do the middle school, you'll
Yeah.
think of these things and we won't be doing this again.
Well, I think the goal of the middle school, which we've started to have some of these discussions, is that we do it in public with a lot of input and make the best decisions possible so we get the school that meets our needs for the cost we want to spend. And that when things don't come to fruition, because we're not going to get everything, that we've had a lot of discussion and input about that, and it won't be the same way we tell the story for whatever we decided not to do. It will be, remember, we made a conscious decision not to do this. I don't know what those topics are going to be yet. Versus the way it feels from the high school is, it doesn't feel like people were as informed, and I'll leave it at that, probably.
Okay,
But-
thank you.
So, one thing that came up at last year's town meeting, was how you manage the existing parking, and that is by an assigned number.
Yeah, we're looking at all of that. Those will be part of the options that I share at town meeting. Right now, we did assign spots, so the pros and cons, right? You think you try a new idea that's gonna solve part of the problem, and it actually creates other problems. We had the same get there early and sleep going on in the parking lot itself. So we decided we wanted to eliminate that and assign kids spots. That's trickled into other issues of other kinds with well, a black market for spots, which they were selling to each other. We cut
Or if I
that
don't
out.
drive, or if I don't drive today, my spot just can't be used.
So
'cause
we're looking at how, yeah,
It is, there's different
we have
side
some
effects.
entrepreneurs in the mix.
Arbitrage.
You know what? That's a great opportunity, though, because if you had a group of students who formed a management team, and they're the ones that came up with the plan in terms of how parking is allocated, whether it's you get a slot or you can share a
Yeah, so
slot,
I think-
things like that. I really think it could be a great opportunity for the students as well in terms of
Yeah.
managing and understanding the issues of when somebody's upset about not having their space, right? They have to sort it out.
Yes, knowing how upset people get, I'm not sure I leave them totally to themselves. We are looking at, though, how we can share spaces differently. Carpooling really isn't an option because of liability concerns, and the school can't be part of that exactly. However, we're, Mothers Out Front, actually getting some other perspectives in the room and a fresh set of eyes on it. Mothers Out Front's brainstorming some options that would be about sharing spaces, not how you get there, just if you've got a group of kids who might want to all use the same space, it would be on them to figure out
That's
how
right.
that gets divided. And all we would know is that we would prioritize spaces for kids who were going to share, or something like that. We're still in the throes of it.
I really think it would be a great opportunity for them to take on a management challenge like
It
that.
would. My only concern is there's been a lot of emotion when people get upset, and I don't know totally if it's a student to student.
Or you could have
All
a
right.
staff person
I
who works
think-
with
Thank you,
them.
I'm getting
thank you for
signaling
answering
that
all those.
we
You're
questions.
welcome.
discuss this to the limits that we're going to find any solutions. So
I do have
we
an-
understand what you're looking for, so.
I do have an answer for Greg, my apologies.
Oh,
So it's
okay.
about 42,000 that we spend on the contract service, and then whatever overtime.
And that's for
on the
everything
staff.
that's there
Depending
at
on
the
the
high school right now?
That's the high school. So
Stabilization
it
fund.
fluctuates year to year.
Right.
Right now, I budgeted about 42 based on actuals. One year we had 25, but the year before that, we were right at 42.
But the new parking lot would be probably a quarter of what you have there? Is that
Less.
Yeah, less.
less than
Yeah.
that? Okay, so it's almost very, it's almost very
It's
insignificant.
the whole campus.
So it's almost very insignificant
It would
I think it is,
in
yeah.
your budget. Thank you very
5
much.
to 10%
question.
more on the
Yeah.
plowing budget. Okay. I don't know that there's that much to be said about Article 29. We proposed this article, and the Select Board very graciously offered it onto the warrant. We are very happy to see that recommendation of a $2 million stabilization fund set aside for tax relief and just to bring down the debt service spike that we'll see.
Does anyone want to talk about whether $2 million is the right amount?
I do.
Sure.
Sure,
go ahead. Right, just to level set, once it's in the warrant at that number, it's done, but it can be taken.
It can be taken
It can be
down.
taken down, but
be
it can't
lower.
go up.
And is that already set?
It's set at
Yeah.
2 million.
Yeah, it said it.
Never mind.
Yeah, we talked about it. We did.
We did.
We did.
Small amounts, you know, they can be, but just not,
It's,
can't go up.
it can't go up
Can't go up 500,000.
no.
Okay, never mind.
But it can go down. And is there an opportunity to talk about that?
There
Going
is.
down?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
sure.
Okay. Is it appropriate now, or is
Sure.
it another?
Sure.
Okay. I'm just curious, having received the numbers on what the free cash calculations were, that we are, if we fund every of the 4 articles that have money in them, if we fund all of those, we're really dropping down our reserve. It's no longer 10%, it would be down to about, I don't know, what'd I come up with, about 7?
10 is the high number that we're supposed to be between 5 and 10.
Right,
So
right.
we're still.
But it would be
we're-
down to about 7%.
10%, yep. You're right.
So, in thinking about which of these articles have some flexibility, all of them have flexibility, right? They can all go down. But I'm just wondering about the reserve, the Article 29. Maybe we could be thinking about reducing that amount from 2
I-
million.
Go ahead, if you want to say something.
Actually, I think the free cash is specifically built up for these types of things. So to me, the use of the money for a stabilization fund is the complete appropriate use for free cash. It's the other articles that are questionable to me. So for me, moving, building up free cash so that you can reduce the spike in debt is an appropriate use. So I'm
We have a
okay.
couple of years, though, in order to do that, right? We're not gonna,
Right,
Got a
so,
huge spike coming to.
I know there's a huge spike coming, but when is it coming? Is it gonna be tomorrow?
But
Is
it's
it gonna
not
be
gonna
in
be
this
spent.
calendar
They
year?
have
So,
Is it gonna
another-
be in
It's just
two
an
calendar?
I think another way of thinking of it, though, is to say, we still have this much money in the bank. We've just
Yes.
identified that
That's-
these dollars
Yeah.
Just
are
tagging
gonna
it
be
in.
spent in the future
Yeah.
to do reduction of our tax bill. The money's still in the bank. This is not like we're taking $500,000 and buying an affordable house.
No, I understand
We're
that as well,
keeping
but
the
it's a
money.
commitment. We
It's a
have made that
commitment.
commitment.
It
Well,
is.
do we have to make that entire commitment this year? Can this be spread out over a couple of years?
I think, if anything, if we look at the history of how this was done for the high school, we're behind the curve. That's the way I feel.
Yeah.
The high school ultimately cost us less to build because of the MSBA participation, and we put more money aside. We're not at a position, anywhere near at a position now where we would be if we had done the same schedule.
Put
at the high
aside, what, 4 million?
something like 4 million.
Okay.
And it was,
All right.
then it was spent out over the course of maybe 4
Okay.
years.
I'm just wondering, when are we gonna be hitting this amount? Is it in 2022, 2023?
I think it was 2023.
I think 2023 was the year that the estimate was that the median household tax bill would go up by $1,000 in
Right.
1 year, and then continue at sort of a 4% compound rate.
That's right.
But
But
so
that was
I was going to
before the
argue, actually, I was going to agree with you, Mary. I think this should be at least maintained at the $2 million level. My
Yeah.
questioning was really more, should it not possibly be more? Because my feeling is that free cash is a misnomer. It's not free cash, it's accumulated surplus.
It is.
Right.
And this is a way of taking money that taxpayers have already paid and already committed to. We've already asked them to step up to this to offset the growth of a future expenditure, and I think that's a really good use of that money.
Yeah.
So I would be opposed to reducing it. And I think it also facilitates the project, which is a good thing. And my guess would be there may be more forthcoming in the future.
I would suspect that as well.
And I would be in favor of that, I think, too, if
Yeah,
accumulated surplus permitted, i.e. free cash.
right.
That's my view.
As a first-year FinCom member, I posed the question to Carrie and asked her, I don't know the history behind why we chose 2 million, whether it was high school and stuff. I'd like to understand that a little bit. And then I also did pose over the holiday break, and Carrie would so graciously got back, a chart of the 5-year period of how much this breaks down to the average taxpayer. So in total, just so everybody knows, it's about $276 over a 5-year term for this $2 million right there.
Yep.
But I'd like to learn just a little bit about the history, so if somebody asks me, I know,
How do we pick
how
this?
did we choose 2 million? Because it felt a little rushed on that night. to me.
Didn't it come straight from the high school experience?
I wrote a letter, I don't have it handy, but I wrote a letter supporting our request for this article with a history of the high school's set-asides and their expenditures. And this was in line with that
Okay.
practice. But beyond that, there was no other logic other than.
It was
it had-
with
And also, this was anticipating a larger spend. The high school was something like 67 million after the MSBA funded the other 25, 30%. So we didn't spend as much as we're anticipating spending on the middle school, which is looking like 80 to 100. So we have a larger spend, and the schedule is probably in line or even behind the curve in terms of what we did for the
Plus,
high
there's
school.
only so much excess over the floor anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
What's that?
No, the floor is 5%, right?
Yes.
That's
Yes,
the
yes,
least we can
that's the
maintain.
floor.
Yes.
So there's only so much room anyway. There's
Right.
$5 or $6 million, so you're probably not gonna use it all.
No, you're not gonna use it
So,
all.
the number can't be anywhere. It's really in that range. of somewhere 0 to 5.
So it's a 5 million.
Yeah.
We did, actually, I remember the meeting when we discussed this, because I did propose increasing it to 2.5 million.
That's right.
And we talked about it, and I remember Phil opposed it pretty vehemently because he thought it would send the wrong message, I think.
That's right.
And so then so I withdrew my amendment, and we voted on the 2 million. I remember that. So it's 2 million.
Okay, all right. Well, that was a robust discussion of something I thought was just a no-brainer. So-
Leave it to us.
Sorry, that was my fault.
But we haven't hit the other ones. We've only talked about that one.
Right, the one that's on the list for tonight, that's right.
Okay,
Okay.
and so now we're going to hear from the petitioner about healthy school buses.
I gotta read this.
We're gonna stay, because at some
Yeah.
point
You're
you're gonna ask.
welcome
I think that's a good idea. Yeah, I'm actually here
You
mostly.
introduce yourself for us?
Sorry.
Thanks.
Brian Folds, 33 Riverdale Road. I'm here really to answer your questions. So the article is for a gap in funding. So the schools budget a certain amount to replace their school buses, their diesel buses, and there is a grant program, or well, it's a Volkswagen settlement program, that can fund the purchase of an electric school bus. And that program will cover 80%, which we could easily do in normal circumstances for one bus, but the program is capped at 500,000. So if we do 2 buses, there's a missing piece. So if we use all of the money in the school's budget to replace a bus, and we use the 500,000 in the grant, there's a missing 40,000 there, and then there's going to be costs for putting in the infrastructure for fueling. So that's what this money is requesting. It's a simple choice of, do we do 1 bus, or do we do 2 and accelerate the program?
So right now, the school is anticipating just replacing a bus, and this is going to be 2 buses instead of a bus, or just so I'm clear?
Actually, last year, we had this discussion, and it's hard to look at the finances and say, the school should pay more for the transportation aspect than they planned, which means that money has to come from somewhere else. I was listening to the conversation about $97,000 and going, wow, I'm glad I'm bringing this article, because I would like to get 2 buses, and I know there's no way that I could ask for that kind of money out of their budget if they haven't planned for it.
So it's for a bus and infrastructure?
Yes, the
2
charge.
buses.
2 buses.
2 buses.
2 buses
No,
and
wait,
the charging.
The 200 is for the gap to get the second bus.
It's well, if
How
we
much
do-
does a bus cost?
Oh,
Good,
yes.
good
A
start.
good
start,
first
John.
start. So think of a diesel bus. The purchase price is about $100,000.
Okay.
To buy an electric bus, the one that we have quoted is $365,000.
Okay.
And then you've got to put in charging infrastructure. And a lot of the cost of the charging infrastructure, because when we built the depot, we got the grant for the first electric school bus, and I had the forethought to tell the schools, put in more than 1 conduit in the ground when you do the parking lot, and they did. And so for this bus that we're going to receive, that we've got the funding for, we have that in place. So it's a very small cost to put in the charging infrastructure. But when we get to these 2 buses, we'll need to do a new trench from a new service point for CMLP around one of the large lots to get to that row of buses.
So,
that-
sorry, just so I understand, Volkswagen is providing 500,000 from their grant, and it's the 200 in addition to that to complete all these other things that you're asking
Yes,
for?
and 200 from the existing budgeted plan for purchasing diesels.
I'm sorry, what,
Oh, so we're not gonna buy some diesel, so you're asking the school to redirect some budget money? Is that right? Okay,
Yeah, well, instead of buying a diesel bus, they'd be buying an electric bus.
right, but that's not in their plan, so they came to us with a plan, right, for what they wanted for buses.
2 or
So
3 diesel buses?
so they had
Is
some
that in the
diesel
budget?
We have to
buses in
budget
there.
for diesel because there's no possible way for us to
Right,
budget for
right,
electric.
so you budgeted for diesel.
If this were to help flesh out the grant to maximize what the grant could do, plus what we've budgeted, it would allow us to do more faster, essentially.
So how much is
you
that?
would redirect?
Sorry.
Yes.
to ask
So
so many
I should have been more, I've done this conversation so many times, I think I'm kind of jumping you guys into the middle of the conversation. So, do you know the history Does this committee know the history of
No, I
electric
think
school
we-
buses in town?
Yes.
Yes.
I
Okay.
think it's the numbers that we want to focus on.
All right, yeah, so the school's budget, how many buses do you purchase each year? Or,
For about five or six.
You lease
Between the both. We lease.
Yep.
yeah.
We lease.
And so that budgeted plan for 5 buses, it would change that to 3 diesel and 2 electric. And then,
I'm sorry, I'm got it.
Me too.
yeah,
Okay, so they're 365 apiece.
Mhm.
You want 2,
yes.
right?
So
Okay,
that's-
so, but the difference, the shortfall that you're at is 530, right?
5, yeah, almost 540.
Okay, so 540. So you need 540. If we were to green light, if you were to green light this, because it's being green lighted, you would probably shift your cash over to this amount, which is how much cash are you putting up?
So
Okay,
so it would be 740,
For the
and their
lease,
200
for-
would
per
be
bus.
that
940.
540.
What-
The
what-
500.
Slow down.
No.
They're 365 a bus.
Yep.
So we got,
I should have brought a handout.
Yeah, you really should.
I apologize.
so it's 375 times 2, but how much cash would you put up for this?
We budget 40 per bus when we lease.
So it's 40 per bus
Per
times
year.
5 buses, so it's
Per year,
200 grand.
right.
Per year, which
Per
over
year.
5 years is
Yep.
100,000 per bus, or,
Yep.
or
Yep.
200,000 in total.
So it would be an operational savings of 40, so it's coming out of the operating budget. Right, it's in your operating budget.
Well,
I don't know.
no, they're gonna commit their operating
Yeah.
budget
Right.
to
Yeah,
it.
but it comes out of
Two.
the, it comes,
Right.
Yeah.
so it would be reduction in their operating budget. If we,
No.
if this is.
Still go to buses and
No.
just go to electric
It would
instead
just
of
go-
diesel.
yeah.
So have
Would-
to run.
It wouldn't
those
cost us
40
more.
Right,
would,
okay.
for 5 years, would end up,
Yeah, I think Brian's main point when we talked on this, because we've got one round of VW grant funds that just came in, that we can only buy one bus, because this is about the second round. The 500,000 doesn't, which is the cap on the VW,
right.
doesn't go as far because of the way the structure of the pricing of the electric buses is. If you can get one bus within that 500,000, but then you've essentially left money on the table.
Right.
Because you can't get a second within the 500,000. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So I think that's what Brian's goal was, to give us some flexibility to be able to get to a second bus. And he also knows there's infrastructure needs as we start to get to a total of 3 buses and beyond.
What's the timing? When would we actually get the second bus? Or the first
That's
bus?
a good question.
So the application would happen sometime in the next few months.
Yep.
And then we'd have to wait on the state to hear back. In the first round, that took almost the full year.
Okay,
And then we would hear that we received the money, and then it goes into the ordering process.
Would
And
it
right
be
now it's a
like,
And there's a
year.
delay on the
would it be
order.
likely that this would end up in your 22 budget then?
exactly, that's where
Yeah.
I'm going.
So we would pass this now, and ultimately, these funds would be set aside to really fund this activity in the 22 budget.
When
No, where I
does
was
the
going is why isn't it
VW
included in the normal
grant expire?
budget process?
It is, it's
It
up
can
to the
wait.
state.
Yeah.
There's
that's
there's
good-
75 million
Why are
in
we
funding
giving
from
money
it.
now when they don't need
15%,
Well,
or
they
about
need to
16
apply now.
million.
It takes a year to get the, if he applies now.
A portion of that needs to go
Money.
to charging infrastructure,
He needs the
which
money from
is
us to
going to
I'm
other
just wondering,
programs.
can
He
this
needs
go
maybe a
on,
commitment, I don't
can
know.
you,
That's a good question.
This
can
can
you
go-
do this again next year?
Yes.
your
So
application
the
for that
idea
next
would be
year.
that every year we put in an application for at least
right.
one bus, because it's a no-brainer to do one bus. It's
Okay.
actually a net savings.
Until the money runs out, right?
That's right.
Until the money runs out, yeah, but at this, I guess I'm kind of looking at, these 65-seat buses are fairly new, correct? These are your school buses, aren't they 65-passenger buses?
Almost 80.
Yeah.
Some
Almost
of them are
80
83.
passenger buses,
Yeah.
okay. And I know, watching your performance from the previous meeting, that there were a lot of technical difficulties you had. And I know
The
that the
first
smaller
line,
buses,
yeah.
the 45-passenger buses, that technology is good and it's solid. But this other
So-
is not as solid, correct?
Well, it's a difference in drivetrain. The body is exactly the same. So judging whether or not a technology is mature on the number or the capacity of a vehicle.
Yeah. Well, I'm just, you had stated in the presentation that the first year you had a lot of technical difficulties and the bus
Yeah.
went back and all that. I'm just wondering, has all that worked out? Or if you did
Yes, it has.
buy one this year and then another the following year, maybe some of those other kinks would be further along.
So, in the beginning of this year, or beginning of last year, the bus went back to Canada and got
Yeah.
reworked, and when it has come back, it has had no maintenance issues for the
But
year
you're
of
also
operation.
thinking of a different vendor,
Yes,
Bluebird.
so
or-
we're looking at Bluebird instead of Lion this time, that's what we have our quote for. We also want to talk to Thomas, which we buy a lot of their diesel buses. They're working with Proterra for their drivetrain, that's probably the most solid drivetrain out there. But yeah, I'm working hard to make sure we
I know
don't
you are.
have that same experience. When we did that, we had the first electric school bus in the United States. So the idea that we were going to have hiccups and have maintenance issues was known and was set as an expectation.
I get that. I'm just, thinking about, it doesn't
We don't
have to
wanna do
be
it
all that
again.
amount this year. Can you kind of wait and see how some of the other kinks come out?
The
But-
issue with waiting is that Volkswagen money
Uh-huh.
is going out the door, and it doesn't come back. And that's the big funding opportunities for these vehicles that I want to capitalize on.
Okay, so Mary has a question.
Yeah.
I'm following up on the timing that Dee's bringing up, which is, when you say, I guess I'm wondering, if we're not going to get delivery on the bus, and a lot of this money is for infrastructure, why can't this wait and go through the normal budgeting process that we have every year? Why are we coming in
So-
at the last minute and
Well,
asking
it's-
for free cash?
It's because we did that process, or this is why I'm a petitioner in this, is that we did this process and we're getting one bus. I'm doing this process so that we have the opportunity to get two.
Okay, but why couldn't we wait again and again get this
It's-
200,000
so-
during next year's normal budgeting process?
Because of your guidelines. The guidelines that FinCom is giving to the schools, they can't designate how those funds are used. So even if you approve that a bus had value, you can't really designate that use. So I didn't see another mechanism.
Why
I mean,
couldn't-
I'll say that differently. I am not gonna bring a budget with recommendations for these kind of costs of electric buses up against competing against educational needs.
Yeah, and I
That's
do agree that
It's too much money.
the school budget
But
should
we
be
do
used to
that,
educate
don't we do that all the
kids.
time, like air conditioning units and things like that? I mean,
Well, that's a different discussion about
I mean, don't we
what the
do
needs are.
that all the time?
I would not recommend putting these kind of costs in
Okay.
to start building a fleet of electric buses
Okay, so
within
you-
the regular operating
So,
budget.
so you don't want this?
I want this, but not against all the other educational
Okay,
needs.
you're
that
not
we
willing
have.
to trade or prioritize?
No,
Right.
But if we were to look at it in a more global way,
Yes.
this is effectively saying, not only are we over by 97,000 for CPS, but we're over by 97
That's
plus
right.
this article.
That's right.
So that is that's where the rub is kind of coming. I know it's a distinct question, Brian, I'm
I
not
actually-
questioning that, but it's
So,
still,
I just want to make sure that, I agree with the schools on this. I think that if they have a budget, they should put it towards education. One of the difficulties in doing this electric school bus is that there's a revenue stream potential from operating it while it's stationary with vehicle to grid and the light plant. I can't get the light plant to say that they want to buy buses because of that value, and I can't get the schools to say we're willing to pay more because we want to reduce our education funding so people can save money in their electric bill. And that's where I've been kind of stuck, is ratepayers and taxpayers. As someone who does both in town, the project as a whole is of value to me, but I can't get it through the normal process, and that's why I'm ending up as a petitioner.
So you've gone to CMLP, because the reason I'm wondering is, I live in Concord Green, and CMLP is actually paying for us to have a charge point station put in our condominium complex. So they're paying for the trenching, the entire infrastructure on that, and I'm
The
wondering.
shared charging program, yeah.
Right, so why can't you take advantage of why isn't CMLP coming to the table to do this so they can sell more electricity to run electric buses?
So the shared charging program actually has they're running as a business, and they actually have a financial value there. The idea that they would be buying the vehicles.
Buying the vehicles to charge back against themselves.
Yeah, so this could get a really long.
They're doing the infrastructure and the charging station.
Yeah, I don't think
Yeah.
she's questioning about the vehicles, the
I'm
question of the
talking about the
payment, about the
infrastructure.
infrastructure.
Because
They could.
the 200,000 is for infrastructure. I heard you say trenching.
No, it's for the purchase price, which there's no way CMLP would cover. That's about
No, I understand
45
that, but I
grand.
thought the 200,000 included some trenching. I
It
heard-
does,
I heard
it does.
trenching.
It does both, the
both.
infrastructure and the funding gap in the purchase price.
Right.
That's why it says up to 200,000. The, which question am I answering?
The-
So,
Why won't CMLP step up and pay, or help pay for
They
the?
might.
For the,
so
okay,
I have another article which is designed to get all of the department heads together
Correct.
to look at the town's fleet
31.
and go through where we are, what an electrified vision is, what are the potential barriers, and what are the potential solutions to those barriers, and how do the departments work together so this isn't, an exception process, but becomes more of the normal process. That's what that report article is to do, is to address the ongoing
I guess
way.
I'm wondering, why wouldn't that be something that our sustainability director would be doing? Getting the departments together to.
She is, but
So-
it's,
So
but it,
what is
but,
what is the article doing exactly?
so the article is actually getting CMLP, the schools, the Department of Public Works. Transportation is an item within each department's budget. And so Kate is going around and one-on-one, working with every department to do the same story. This would be getting everybody at the table to do the story once, write it up in a report, how the town wants these mechanisms to work in a normal process, so they'll have a report to point to every time they go to look for a vehicle.
I think,
Okay,
Mary, I
we're
could
off-
maybe
we're off-
clarify that what
off track.
I've taken from Brian is that what he's hoping for is an accelerated way to increase the fleet. And
Yes.
we've talked a lot, tried to build some conditions here where some of that urgency is not the right word, but it kind of fits the dynamic that if the town's wishes are that this is what we do, and I stress town, this is not the schools coming to you asking for electric
Correct.
buses.
Yes.
We're
Correct.
chugging along and doing as best we can with funds available.
I heard that, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
But would we participate if this community says this is a priority for us and we'd like you to really focus in and sit with Dave and Kate and everybody else and really make this master plan and get more aggressive on how to, collect funding from other sources and differently use our own? Sure, of course we would. But I think that's Brian's goal, is to try to see if that, see if the community mandate is there to accelerate the process, which ultimately does come with money attached.
I understand, so
So-
I understand that it's for the town, right?
Yeah.
So have you gone to the town manager and asked if the town manager, because the town manager has a very large capital budget.
Yeah, so
Have you
in-
gone to him to ask him if he could embed that in his ongoing capital? Because
Yeah.
we can't be doing this every year coming into free cash. There's got to be a better,
That's the hope of the second article, is to find a way not to do that.
but who's going to
So maybe
pay for
that you
it?
have the cart before the horse?
Who would pay?
Well, so this is, again, goes back to the Volkswagen funding being finite, or being limited, it's going away. So the reason I want to bring the funding article is to ask the town if they want to accelerate the adoption rate. If the other report is to find a way to not have to go to town every year asking if they want to accelerate it.
Right.
That's the two articles.
Gotcha. But what is the value to the town of having these electric buses? Are they gonna be
Yeah.
for CPS use? Are they gonna be for the region? Is Carlisle involved in?
Carlisle's
costs?
not involved, we'll
Correct.
start there.
Carlisle
Right
is
now we're
not
running
involved,
it
so
as a
then it would be
CPS
with
bus.
CPS.
So to
These
answer
two
your-
buses would be for CPS use.
Yes.
Not for the town use, so they're not gonna be like a doodle. Could we get a smaller one of the 45 passenger ones instead of the 80?
That's not what so one of the operational needs is to be able to switch out buses if one fails or has maintenance issues, so
Right.
that's an operational question. I'm gonna leave that to John
Yeah,
and Jared to
There
answer.
isn't
and-
another vision right now, so our role in this conversation is about
Well,
school
this is the
buses
one where
for
she summarized
kids, so
it.
we
So
wouldn't be looking for
it's
anything
just-
smaller.
I agree. I'd love to see a
You're
town
asking
shuttle.
the town
This one,
to
right?
pay for
That
a
one.
school
That we
project.
gotta talk about.
I would disagree that it's a school
Yeah,
project.
I want to be very
I know,
clear
I know.
that Brian's asking if this community is committed to the sustainability goals enough that they would like to see this bus fleet start to transition more quickly.
Yeah, so.
So it is a town conversation. The schools are not going to come to the community and say, we've added it up to like replace our whole fleet is like $14 million or something. We're not gonna do that.
It's-
So Brian's just trying to allow for some flexibility. The 200,000 right now is about the VW grant application, that if we don't have the additional bit of funding available, we have to put in for one bus instead of two, and that's gonna come up this spring.
Right, got it. So so you asked about what is the benefit to the community. There is a lot more that is non-financial, the health benefits, these are less maintenance, after the pilot, and we've worked out the bugs, they're less maintenance.
And you have well-trained mechanics now.
Yeah, actually,
Right.
we have
I know.
Cambridge's bus right now because our people are so good.
Exactly. But the fueling cost is 70% less. I mean, and it's more predictable. When oil prices go up or go down, the cost of diesel does the same. That affects the school's budgets when they're buying 100,000 gallons a year. Electricity is, over time, for decades, is just a slow progression of price, because they always pick the lowest fuel to generate the electricity.
But you do have limitations on the amount of time or that they're available for use, right? Which is, what is 63 minutes
For
for
Miles.
mile,
Which is-
63
which is
miles,
running us-
70.
Yeah, running
But-
both runs, right?
70 miles.
Well,
so-
that's the first bus, which was rated at a range of about 75 miles. It's running in the winter at 70 miles. The buses we're looking at today from Bluebird are 120 miles of range.
They are.
Yes, but they may have more of a loss in the winter because they have an electric heating system which uses energy from the battery, which the other bus has a diesel heater. So the technology is maturing. It is, you don't believe that?
No,
Oh.
I believe it. I'm just saying, it's all about timing, right?
I do.
If you can get one bus,
Yeah.
that's advantageous, right? And another bus another year? I'm just
Ideally, we
throwing
get
it out
2
there.
buses every year for the next few years while the Volkswagen money is there, because financially, that's the most prudent method. But if the town does not want to chase, and the last benefit that I wanted to mention is climate. The diesel emissions from our bus fleet
Right.
is 2 million pounds of CO2 annually. And if we turn these onto electric vehicles powered by CMLP with a plan to get to no emissions, then the fueling emissions are zero.
Brian,
which-
I have to interrupt you. Can I have a question? I have a question. You said that the VW funds are going to dry up,
Yep.
right? So if we were to reduce this warrant article to the amount that we just need to spend in order to take advantage of the VW settlement, right? What would that amount be?
Reduce it to take advantage.
Minus-
That
you're
would-
looking
buy
for
the bus,
minus
minus
out
the
500
infrastructure,
minus
minus
the-
the
Exactly,
chargers.
minus the trenching and the chargers, because I think that can be, this is my opinion, that could be delayed and put in the town manager's budget and prioritized. But I'm just, the thing that, see, to me, the thing that makes this immediate would
Yeah.
be, because there's a grant program that's closing, the door's
Correct.
closing. So if we just wanted to take enough money so that we don't lose that opportunity, what would that amount be?
So it's hard because the chargers are not normally provided in the infrastructure. So those would be,
No, we're just talking about the bus.
I understand. The purchase price of the bus, that would be probably about 50 or 60 for the gap in just purchase price.
Yep, that's right, exactly, that's what.
But that's tight.
Okay,
If
okay, so-
we change to a Thomas and suddenly they're,
Got it. Yep.
$375,
Okay,
it could go over that.
okay.
But the trenching is expensive, and the bidirectional vehicle-to-grid chargers are also expensive.
But what I'm hearing is that we won't need the trenching or the other infrastructure changes
That's,
for a
that's
while.
what you're asking. I think we do need it, just to be clear.
Yeah.
The reason I asked for 200,000 was not, arbitrary.
just a
It was a honest best guess at what we needed to do the project, including the infrastructure. So,
But I think Mary's
I'm
trying to point
asking-
out is that that the buses won't be delivered for a year, that the infrastructure could be put in next year's budget, is really the question.
oh, okay.
That's what she's
that's
getting
what I'm
at. Like
getting
this,
at. I'm getting
the grant program buys us buses, and the grant program might close. So what's the minimum we need to
Yeah.
get the
To-
bus, to
thank
go
you.
get the grant and get the buses?
Yeah.
And then if next year's town manager's budget puts in money for a trench and the
Other
bidirectional
infrastructure,
charging,
right.
that's in next year's budget. And it's
I-
budgeted. It's not coming from free cash.
Yeah.
We're very
Ideally,
we're
she's-
very protective of free cash.
I understand.
So-
Thank you. As a taxpayer, thank you. But what I'd ideally like is an efficient installation, because if we're maxing out at one bus each year or two buses each year, we're trenching every year. I would rather that report in the other article determine that we're going to do this many buses over this many years, and we're going to put in an infrastructure project to get that trenching done all at once for cost efficiency. So
I understand, but the
I'm
report
doing what I
isn't.
can.
I know, well, as we're witnessing with our capital asset planning task force, writing a report and getting funding are different things.
Mhm.
So I would really like to have an answer to my question, which is, how much money would you need in order to take advantage of the VW settlement to get the second bus and forget the infrastructure? Can I just have that number?
I gave 50 to 60,
Thank
but
you.
again,
Why
I
don't you
believe
get
that's
three
tight.
buses then?
What's that?
Why wouldn't you get 3 buses?
Because the third bus would have no grant to match. And thus, it would be 3.5 to
Okay.
4 times the cost.
Fine, thank you.
All right.
And I wouldn't ask that of the community. That's not financially prudent,
You can only get 2 buses.
because the program
Because
caps.
it's 500,000.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Did I answer all your questions?
Yes,
Quick
it
one.
is.
Good.
Very
Sure.
quick answer. If the article fails to pass, Concord Public Schools will apply for a single one?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yep.
And do
A
we need any of
single
the
electric
charging?
bus?
Do we need to update charging for that one? Sorry. It was-
No, he
didn't
already
mean
has
to
a
be
trench
double
for
question.
Is it a single electric bus?
Yeah.
Or a diesel bus?
The-
Single electric
If
bus?
the
Yes,
funding
that's
article
what Greg's
fails,
asking.
we would do exactly what
No
we
charging
did
needed.
this last year.
Yeah.
No updated charging needed for that one, though?
That's okay.
If we hit the third bus, we probably
No.
could use it.
So, yeah, so there's, the conduit in the ground can do 2, maybe 3. I have to find out if we can
We
put
only
data
have 2 at that
lines.
point, so
Yeah.
question answered, thank you.
No, because it
Sorry, I didn't mean to-
No, this would be the
this would
third.
be the third.
Oh, this will be the third, I apologize.
third,
Yeah,
yes.
so I
But the
don't have the
delivery
technical
isn't-
answer. I think we could, but it depends on if I can fit the wires, 3 bundled data wires into 1 tube. That's, the question is going
Technical
to my
answer.
head, I can't guarantee. If we can't fit them, it's another trench.
So I have one more question for
Thank you.
Lori. Where are these buses parked and charged?
At the depot, out back?
They're at the depot.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
How does CMLP get across Acton to get in there and put electricity in there? It just does?
Oh, the lines, the territory for CMLP is not a perfect match with the borders of the town.
Okay, then. All right.
Yeah.
Question answered.
There's areas where.
Who knew?
Yeah,
We had so much
Eversource
trouble
comes
getting,
into
no,
Concord
no,
for
we
some
had so
time.
much trouble getting water to the depot. That's a, it's a
Still
not-
have a water
I
problem
still-
over
Exactly.
there.
I couldn't imagine that we were getting electricity out there. It's
So,
impressive.
2015, we suggested that the depot get a washing station to extend the life of our school buses, but because of the water
Water
issues, we don't
they
have it.
can't. Okay.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you very much.
I beat up on Brian.
Yep. So, Carrie did not provide us with the follow-up list with this week's packet. So we did get a couple of things off of our list. All of the responses from Jared and Dr. Hunter are
Oh,
in
right.
response to our to-do list from last week. So that's a good process, and thank you, Dee, for recommending it, but we've already broken it because there's no to-do list this week, so.
Oh, yes, there were two.
Do you have a
Well,
new to-do list for us?
I don't have a new to-do list, but there were two follow-ons from the minutes for the last one. I liked Pashar's idea that when we do minutes, then if there are any follow-ups,
Right.
that we do it right then. And there were two on page 7.
On page 7.
Uh-huh.
Let's look at it quickly, just see what there is.
And I think both of us have done ours. Carrie was supposed to send out the chart, and I was supposed to give you the list.
And all that's happened.
All of that has happened, so,
But this week, we don't have any fresh lists, so
No,
there you
we
go.
don't.
Okay. Chair's report, I'll be brief. I went to the select board meeting just Monday, and the select board had Mr. Ohanian in to talk about the tax increment financing, and they made a big argument for it. They had Lane Partridge there, who's the assessor. They made no decisions. That he needs this money to make it work. We will have him in the future on March 5th, and we'll talk to him then, but that was.
How much money is it?
Oh, that's a great question. So the assessor had called it at $180,000 a year in taxes. So the taxes would be $180,000. They had budgeted 75, I think,
Yeah.
for a combination of ground lease with CHDC and the taxes. And they could manipulate that, and CHDC could be very flexible, but that does not cover a $180,000 tax bill. So that's where
So the shortfall is 105
Yeah, it's
that we would
105
forgive?
that we would forgive.
For how many years?
Over 20 years.
he's looking for 20.
What's the present value of that?
Yeah, per year, per
100
year,
$100,000
a year? Wow.
per year.
For 20 years.
105 for.
Wow.
And it
20
could,
years?
and it will go up. I mean, that number's gonna be escalating as we go out 20 years. So, yeah. And then, because the state requires these agreements to have limitations, the max is 20 years. And they were asked what would happen after 20 years. And he just said, well, we have an $8 million mortgage. We would refinance our mortgage at that point and then have more headroom to pay actual taxes. That's what he said.
Yeah, so the question, sorry if you don't mind me commenting
Yeah,
on your.
yeah.
I went because I
Yeah.
didn't have the understanding I wanted, so
Yeah.
I was there too.
Yeah.
And what he said was, someone asked, well, if you can't afford the taxes now, how are you gonna afford them
In the future.
20 years from now,
Right.
right? And they presented this case that the mortgage declines over time, which I don't know how these things work, but if their free cash flow,
No,
you
no.
know, improves progressively over the next 20 years, why should we grant,
Time out.
yeah?
Mortgage is it's a mortgage. A mortgage is a level payment affair, but if you refinance it, now you have like a step function where you're now at a new level payment, and that headroom
If
is where he
rates
can
go
then,
down.
then he can then pay the taxes.
If rates
If rates go down,
Good
what if they
point.
go the other way?
Well, that's his,
He won't be refinancing.
he won't refinance, and he won't be able to pay the taxes.
Right.
He'll be long gone.
Exactly.
He'll have sold it
Did
by
he-
then.
Well, his principal balance will be substantially lower, Christine, so in theory, even if he refinances that principal, he should have a lower payment,
Yeah,
even
yeah.
at a higher
So
interest rate
that's what I
environment.
understood.
Yeah.
For there to be greater free cash flow flexibility
That's right.
in years.
But it does-
Just say years, 8 through 20.
Right.
And I sort of wondered why they wanted, a static deal.
Well,
flat- a flat
as I
deal
said,
for
it's a
20
mortgage,
years.
which is a level payment thing, unlike the debt that the town takes out, which is a declining balance type of thing, where you have lower payments as you go out. His would be a level payment where he's paying more principal as high interest at the beginning and,
Right.
a regular mortgage.
But we're talking $100,000.
Yes,
A year for 20 years.
I mean,
it's a lot of money.
well, it is and it isn't. I mean, what is there, now, what are some of his other assumptions? At full occupancy, what's the rate?
I know,
I'm-
he's running an 80-unit system, and we're looking for $100,000, $105,000
How
in the
did he,
budget.
how did they underestimate? Did he address at all how he underestimated?
Just
I didn't-
no.
I didn't get the answer to that. That's one that I'd like to ask him. Is Lane gonna be at our meeting with him here, do you know? Because
I
he
don't,
seemed
he's
to
not
be-
invited
he's not
yet.
invited.
He's not invited.
So the math doesn't work for him financially, that's what he's saying?
That's what he
Yes.
is saying.
Because
So
he-
are we married to him? So, okay.
Well,
get
we're
another
not,
guy.
we have no,
Seriously, why are we dealing with him?
Good question. That's a great
So-
question.
Can I,
well, it's the fear of 40B. You know,
Why? That's what's attractive to
2020,
us.
we will be,
He's the
my
only guy that
understanding
can
is
do it.
2020, we will be re-inventoried, and that number will stand for some amount of time, and the fear would be that we need to have more units to meet the obligation.
That's why Liz Rust will be here
Yeah.
to tell us if
Yeah.
that's true.
I mean, they have done some things for the town by providing this housing, right?
Right.
And jobs for the town. So, I mean, they do,
If
They
it
do create-
happens, they've
they-
done nothing so far, right?
Right.
Nothing's happened,
well,
right?
no, but I mean, they
They could.
They could
They could.
create value.
Right.
And it sounds like
Yes.
things that, as a
Right.
town,
It
we
sounds-
might want to encourage.
Right,
The
right.
question is, what's the cost of that
Right.
encouragement,
Well,
I
you would
guess,
think that's
right?
encouragement at the front end of a project, right? So you want to help him get started when he's not earning a lot of revenue. 20 years is an awful long time to be supplementing.
My
him.
guess would be that his construction budget has escalated.
Yeah, something's happened. That's surprising to
Well-
me that the guy would come back now and ask for more dough.
Yeah, you know, I did what reading I could on this tax increment financing. It's for blighted properties where you're going from, you know, a burned-out shell to
Yeah.
I've created value in something that didn't have value, and the community sees that as a real benefit and wants to give you some relief
And some
from the
incentive,
stark
right.
upgrade in taxes that you're generating by doing a construction project.
Is there any chance
that's
that
not our
it wouldn't
case.
qualify?
Yeah,
Is there any chance
Yeah.
it would not qualify?
Well, he was asked that question, like if the town approved it and entered into an agreement, and then that was sent to the state, would the state turn it down? And he said, if the project is going to generate 30 jobs within the community, the state is likely to rubber stamp it.
really?
Yeah, because that's a qualifying, because generating jobs within the community is a qualifying characteristic.
Even if you're not blighted to begin with?
'Cause we're
Well,
not
it's
blighted.
not blighted, it's underutilized. It's
Okay.
not used.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know what to say. It's certainly.
Okay.
In this sense, is jobs, construction jobs or ongoing?
There are ongoing jobs
Ongoing
within the
Working in the
facility. There are people who would have to
facility.
work in this
Assisted
assisted
living,
living.
right?
There's you know, orderlies and doctors and nurses or whatever. So that's the meat and potatoes of my chair's report. I have a chair's breakfast next Wednesday, and I'll report back on March 5th, because we have no meeting next week. So, observer reports, anybody else got observer reports?
Yeah, I went to the League of Women Voters First Friday last week. It was all about the middle school. Lori gave a presentation about the educational vision, so she wasn't talking money at all. And it was actually, I got excited about it. I mean, what they plan to do with that school is really amazing. And, you know, I'm always looking at the numbers, but I wished I was a kid that was going to the Concord middle schools in a few years. It was amazing what they're planning on doing. So that was very, very good. And then they also talked about the timing, which we know is very aggressive. And then they had Kate Hanley there talking about sustainability. And there's a difference between, well, you've talked about this, Greg, about net zero versus net zero ready. So that's going to be the rub, I think, as far as do we go with net zero or do we go with net zero ready as far as how much the building will cost. But my sense is that the town is behind this middle school, okay? My sense is it's going to happen. Holding out for MSBA is just not going to fly. I think the only pressure we can put on now is we can influence the size of the school. And so I think, you know, whether they do the auditorium, whether they do the central kitchen, whether they have summer programs, these things that add money, I think that's where we can still have a voice. And I would recommend that any of us who can go to the next hearing, which I think Peter said was February something.
27.
27.
Thank you. February 27th, and I intend to go there and stand up and say, you know, I think this is a great idea. I'm excited about the school. I'm excited about the education you're going to be provide for our kids, but let's remember that we're still paying off debt. You know, we've got to make some trade-offs. So that's where I was.
Thank you. Greg?
Board of Health, this past Monday night. Nothing too financially impacting. There's one citation for some cigarettes. What I did find interesting is because of the flavored ban that has gone in effect, there's going to be some money coming, I believe it's to the Board of Health, to do something with, you know, whether it's tobacco control, you know, testing programs to see if they sell stuff to minors and that type of stuff.
Is this like grant money from the state?
Yeah, as part of that, to enforce, to see that this is actually getting enforced
Enforced.
properly.
Okay.
Yeah, what was interesting though is we are not actually in a tobacco control program right now, which is like towns band together and supply those testing services to each other. We're actually, I forget which town it is, but we're sort of, one of them is doing us a favor by testing right now for us, which I found.
What do they send in, like undercover youthful
So
people
yeah,
to purchase
they find
products and stuff?
they find 18-year-olds, male and female, to go in, and that's exactly what they do. Colonial Motors had a fine of $1,000 $100 because they got caught with it. That fine is actually going up to $1,000 for the first offense, $2,000 for the third offense, or second offense, and $5,000 for the third and possible. So there's going to be much heftier charges coming forward. And that was it. You'll be seeing some changes with signage probably. There won't be signs at like 7-Eleven. They took them down to get students to stop buying cigarettes, and they're possibly thinking about creating a bylaw to put the cigarettes underneath the cash register and stuff and get rid of the signs so that they're there, but they're just not in the influence of students, which I thought was a.
Is there any conversation about potential litigation that the town will be facing due to some of these restrictions that we're putting on from the tobacco companies, et cetera, who want to make an example of this?
Yeah, there wasn't any discussion upon that. There was thinking, I believe the Board of Health Director was referring to the attorney when she kept saying a name that, you know, thinks we can do this. And I believe it was probably the town attorney or somebody to that effect. One store, I don't know if he was the owner, he works at 7-Eleven, did mention that like Marlboro, for example, does in their contract say you should put them up there, but the store owner said, no, I don't care, take the signs down and keep them. So that was nice. The 7-Eleven store guy from the public.
Sorry, Greg, do you mean Cumberland Farms? Or which
7-Eleven is over in West Concord.
The 7-Eleven in
West
yes,
Got it,
yes,
got it.
yes,
Yeah,
in
okay.
West Concord.
Thank you.
I went to the hearing really about the flavored
Yeah.
smoking, and he did a great job, and he instituted it all by himself. That wasn't under any direction from the town. He decided to take them down, and he was gonna do part of the program.
Okay.
So
It's a
that,
7-Eleven?
what's that?
Is it are you
Yeah.
talking about the 7-Eleven?
The 7-Eleven owner manager decided to do that by himself, so he's taking proactive steps there. Other than that, there were some other just health things that didn't have.
Andrea, any observations?
Well, I went to the Council on Aging meeting on Monday, but there was nobody there. It was in my calendar.
That would be nothing to report then.
Found a custodian, looked up the schedule, and it was postponed till the 24th.
All right, well, we'll hear your report on March 5th.
Look forward to that.
All right. Ryan?
Nothing to report. The library doesn't convene until next week.
Okay.
Capital Planning Task Force, they didn't have a quorum, so there was no meeting.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, what do you know? Okay.
Nothing new on Minuteman.
Nothing, tax relief tomorrow, so I'll have more next time.
Tax relief.
Yeah.
Department of Public Works met last night. There were two primary issues. One is their project for Concord Turnpike, which is their Cambridge Turnpike, which they, the acting director, Alan Cathcart, says that they hope to have that done before snow falls next year. So they've bumped into, it's not really that long a stretch of road, but it's been a very consuming, complex project.
A lot of water going through it.
Yeah.
They raise it up, you had a bridge, there's
Pillars,
pillars.
and they've got to work with Verizon to.
Oh, no.
So actually, that's kind of the smart thing, is they're using this opportunity to replace all of the infrastructure underground, hopefully for a very long time.
Yeah, so it's quite an involved project for a relatively short stretch of road. The other issue that they're grappling with, there are a lot of zoning and planning board changes going on, and they are concerned about the impact on wastewater because our current wastewater system, we average about a little over 1 million gallons a day. The permit is for 1.2 million.
Okay.
So they just want to make sure that
So
they stay within their.
Are they concerned
permit.
about like the accessory unit or the
Yeah,
two-family,
exactly.
creating more units of, you
Right.
know, of housing,
Right.
more people? Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
all right, thank you. Finance Director is not here this evening, so we don't have a Finance Director's report. I don't see any citizens in the
Not
room.
one.
Not
Jeez,
one.
we wore
It's a
them out.
ghost town.
However, we had several citizens send
A lot of
us
correspondence.
correspondence.
Yes.
I'm really sorry to say I don't have an actual list, but on numerous of those, we were the CC partner. We
Yeah.
were not
Yeah.
actually the addressee.
Right.
A lot of them were
They were, in large measure, they were about
Yeah.
Estabrook. People are showing great concern for, you know, the town's expenditure of money on this effort, and
And
the
the
lack
use
of information that
Yeah.
they
Lack
seem
of
to be receiving.
transparency.
Privilege was the.
Well,
seemed to
the
be
word privilege
seemed to
came
be
up,
there.
transparency, and worse, you know, so but the point being across numerous pieces of correspondence was the town needs to, you know, kind of come clean. You know, what is the purpose and what is the, you know, how are we getting to an end point with the litigation? But I'm sorry, I just don't have a strict inventory of those who did send us mail, so I apologize to the public, there's nobody here, and to those at home, so, for that, but we did receive your mail, and we have looked it over. With that, I'm looking for a motion.
Maybe one last action item
Oh, yeah.
for D. Last time we talked about everyone spending a little time on ClearGov.
Oh.
And it struck me that it would be really helpful if everybody looked at some of the debt service metrics for the town and for CPS to familiarize ourselves with the degree of complexity and change that will be going on there. So I might just.
Mary and I have had numerous pieces of email back and forth about debt service and the town over the last 3 days.
Yes, we have.
And if you could point to the page if you want in the report.
Oh, page 43?
Page
Yeah,
43.
page 40.
Oh, do we
43.
really want to?
In the budget book.
Well-
Identifies a somewhat unusual representation of how our debt was arrived at, so.
Yeah, well, I'm meeting, I don't know if you're going to join me. I'm meeting with,
I might be mobile enough to.
great, that would be good. We're meeting with Carrie tomorrow to go over page 43, because we want to get clarity around the town's debt policy. Because we do have a financial policy, the way it's written is kind of vague, and this gave more details, except it contradicts the policy, so.
Right.
So we're trying to get a better understanding of what exactly the town's financial policy is.
Are you saying our financials are beyond the policy?
No, what,
No.
the policy says that 2 to 3% of what we pay in debt in the budget will be paid out of the operating budget, out of the general fund. And the remaining 5 or so percent, because the range is 7 to 8% for capital outlays. 2 to 3% of that will come right out of operating. Maybe you're buying a new police cruiser or something. And larger projects would end up being for debt within the levy limit, and that's up to 5%. But that is of the budget. So the 5%, we believe, Mary and I, in looking this over in great detail, means 5% is what we're paying in debt service.
Service.
In debt service. So
Not-
that's
Not
the.
outlay.
Not
outlay.
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
debt service.
I see.
Yeah, the policy
Policy
clearly
seems to
states
clearly say we're
service.
talking about 5% of our budget can be done with debt service, for debt service. So the calculations done on page 43 are using outlay within 5 to 7%.
I see.
5 to 8%.
And not-
So it's, the calculations on page 43 don't seem to align with the way the policy is being. Now, if you look back on page 54, which I'm quoting, this is like some kind of Bible study.
Let's now go to Leviticus.
Which at 10 o'clock, there's nothing we'd rather be doing. Go ahead, Bible study, what?
Page 54.
It's written, here it's
Page
written.
54 is the.
Service schedule.
Is the service schedule.
Yeah.
And in that, on that page, you can add up principal and interest in the years 2017 through 2020.
Yeah.
Okay? And that includes school and town debt. There are other columns that deal
Right.
with outside the levy limit. Let's
Right.
forget those columns,
Right,
but if
right.
you add up those other columns, you end up with numbers that are 3.1, what did I quote you, Mary? It was like 3.016 million?
Yes.
In 2017 to 4.017 or something million. And these numbers are in the 5% of budget range. So our debt service seems to be in the range we are expecting it to be in, but the presentation on page 43 just describes outlay within the 5 to 7%, and it doesn't make any sense.
It's, to me, the problem is more than just how it was described in this. To me, the problem is that every year we approve capital outlays without having visibility to what that does to our subsequent debt service.
Right.
And the policy addresses debt service, but we're talking outlay.
Right.
So we never really integrate those.
Yep, I
You know,
see.
so I worry that someday we're gonna have a huge debt service because we've been approving outlays. You see where I'm going?
I do, yep.
So if you look
That's
on,
important.
Yep,
I think
that's-
so.
that's
I think
important.
if you look on page 15,
Here we go.
I don't have my book in front of me, but I think
Nice
it's
pie chart.
Am I on the right page? Am
It's
I?
a nice pie chart.
No, sorry, on page 16. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know my, I don't know it.
This is.
So, all right, so if you look on page 16, you'll see line 16 on page 16, town and CPS excluded, and so line 15, I'm sorry, that's where my number 15 came from. Line 15, okay, you can see 3.7 million, 3.86, 4025, et cetera. Debt service is projected to go down in the 21 budget. So we're approving all of this outlay, but debt service is projected to go down by $58,000. So it doesn't follow from, it's obscure how you get to
Exactly.
this point where
I-
there's,
I
the
think-
underlying assumptions are not clear at all. how
I
that
think this
happens.
is because a lot of the
That's one for next
projects
time.
we approve aren't shovel-ready when we approve them. So they're in queue, but they haven't been started, so we haven't issued the debt. So it's complicated.
It's complicated, yeah.
So,
So that's what we're
so
gonna talk about.
Mary has scheduled a meeting with Carrie to go over these, thank you for bringing that up, given you spent us another
John.
10 minutes of a meeting.
Sorry.
John,
I think it's an important part for all of
John,
us to
if you're-
understand better going forward.
and if you're thinking about total debt relative to our peers, I mean, if you could actually bring in something to us, that might help, or at least.
Well, sure, I can do that.
Right.
Why don't I send you a couple of links with
That would be
what I
good.
suggest, and you can look at it and think
Right,
about it.
so- Right, because we're just talking about debt within the levy limit. I think you're talking about total debt.
Overall, yeah.
Well, total debt and total debt service.
Yes.
And by entity and compared to the peer group.
Right.
Is what I'm talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that needs to be normalized usually by population of the community some-
Yeah,
in
we
some
have to
way.
have a ratio
Debt per
of some-
capita or service per capita
Yeah,
or
per
something.
capita, or
something.
the revenue base or
Yeah, you
something.
gotta.
Debt service as a
baseline.
percentage of the operating budget
Yeah,
is another
something like
way to
that,
look
yeah,
at it,
yeah.
right? Is what I would have said.
Yeah, that's a way to look at it,
Yeah.
some way.
All right, so I'm still looking for a motion.
So moved.
So that there's no meeting next
Wait, sorry, we have a motion on the table.
Go ahead, Andrea.
We have a motion on the
We
table.
don't have a second.
I should not come to a meeting next week.
No, you shouldn't.
No.
I should not come to a meeting on the 27th,
no.
because
The
nobody will be.
Is the 20th canceled, right?
Yes.
20th is canceled.
March 5th.
And March 5th is our
27th.
next,
We're here.
is our next
If in
meeting.
doubt, go to the town website and look at the.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, you can always find our schedule on the town website. And if Carrie puts something up, which she did, she had to pull it down for the 20th, because we have to reschedule, so. So, yes.
Okay, move to
I'll make a
adjourn.
motion
Okay.
to adjourn.
A second.
Second.
All in favor, stand up. Thank you.